Hello, curious minds, and welcome to Documentary for Sleep. If you found your way here tonight, maybe your mind is still wide awake, circling around questions it doesn't want to let go of. Or maybe you're just looking for something softer, something to drift alongside while the day fades away. Whether you're lying in bed, waiting for sleep to arrive, letting this play in the background while cooking, or even wearing headphones on a long, quiet night shift, this is your little pause. A moment to slow down and wander back through human history, not into fantasy, but into the deep past, into science, into memory. This is a channel for soft science, grounded in anthropology, archaeology, and evolutionary thinking, not in wild speculation. Tonight's question is a gentle one, but also a profound one. Why did humans, a species so focused on survival, spend time painting caves, carving figurines, singing songs, dancing, and gathering in ritual? These things don't feed us, don't shelter us, don't directly keep us alive, and yet they're everywhere, across every culture. We don't have all the answers, but we do have the artifacts, the stories, and the mysteries. And if somewhere along the way you drift off into sleep, that's perfectly fine, because sometimes the best questions can follow you into dreams. I've left timestamps in the description, so if you nod off, you can always return and pick up exactly where you left off tomorrow. This whole journey is worth hearing from the first word to the last. If this kind of quiet storytelling helps you rest, learn, or simply step out of the noise of the day, consider liking this video and subscribing. It helps this little corner of soft science reach more curious sapiens like you. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Do you listen at night while studying, or maybe somewhere far from home on the other side of the world? However you're here, you're part of this community. And as always, stay curious, stay calm. In the deep, moonless dark of a prehistoric night, the wind did not merely blow, it sang. It found a fissure in a limestone cliff and began to work, its breath shaping a low, resonant hum that was neither entirely of the world nor apart from it. A solitary figure perhaps paused in the stillness, feeling the vibration not just in the ears, but in the chest. A hand rises, not to a weapon, but to the steady, insistent rhythm pulsing within its own body. Was this the first moment of recognition? That the body itself was an instrument, that the heartbeat was a drum waiting to be answered? This primal synchrony is more than poetic fancy. It is etched into our biology. Deep within the human brain, a network of neurons fires not just to process sound, but to seek pattern, to anticipate the next beat. It is a unique inheritance. While other creatures communicate, we are the only species that can voluntarily synchronize our movements to an external rhythm, to tap a foot in perfect time. This ability to entrain, to lock our internal metronome to the world's, suggests that music was not an invention but a discovery, an uncovering of a fundamental resonance between the structure of our minds and the structure of the world. The rhythm of a heartbeat, the cadence of a breath, the cyclical patterns of day and night and season. Were our first melodies simply an echo of the universe's own pulse? The archaeological record offers tantalizing silent evidence. In caves across Europe and Africa, among the stone tools and the bones of long-consumed meals, we find carefully crafted flutes carved from the wings of vultures and lithophones, stones like the ancient Janja of Vietnam, that ring with a clear melodic tone when struck. These were not hunting instruments. Their placement, often in ceremonial spaces far from the practical debris of daily survival, speaks of a different purpose. They required immense effort to create, a deliberate investment of calories and skill for something that put no food on the fire and built no shelter. What urgent need, then, did they fulfill? Was it the need to mark a birth, to honor a death, to bind a community together under a shared, vibrating canopy of sound? This binding power is something we witness even before language fully takes hold. A fussing infant, blind to the complexities of syntax and meaning, will still quiet to a lullaby. In the modern world, where survival is, for many, a less immediate struggle, music's purpose seems even more pronounced. It does not fill our stomachs, yet it satiates a different kind of hunger. It can calm a panic attack, unite a stadium of strangers into a single, roaring entity, or provide the solitary soundtrack to a heartbreak. Its value is not in its material utility, but in its ability to orchestrate our inner lives, to give form to the formless turbulence of emotion. Yet, a skeptical voice, the voice of pure pragmatism, might ask, if music offered no direct advantage in the Darwinian struggle, if it didn't sharpen a spear or predict the migration of herds, why would the brain, that costly and calorie-hungry organ, dedicate precious resources to its perception and creation? Perhaps it is merely a fortunate accident, a byproduct of other cognitive skills like language, an evolutionary cheesecake that tricks our neural circuits into a pleasurable but meaningless feedback loop. But if music is just a beautiful parasite, a delightful glitch in the system with no survival value, why have we, as a species, never once considered abandoning it? Through famine and war, through plague and revolution, in every culture that has ever existed, the song remains. It is woven into the fabric of our most profound grief and our most ecstatic joy. It is a technology of feeling that predates the wheel. So we are left with a puzzle that is also a quiet observation. Perhaps the question is not what music is for, but what we are for, if we are creatures who require such a thing. And this very requirement hints at a deeper shift, a rewiring of the mind itself. As the Homo sapiens brain swelled in size and complexity, it granted us more than the ability to outthink our prey. It opened a new, internal landscape, a capacity not just to see the world, but to imagine it differently, to tell stories about our place within it, and to gaze into the abyss of our own mortality. What use is a bigger brain, if not just for calculation, but for contemplation? Imagine a creature walking the earth some 300,000 years ago. It stands upright, but it is not the tallest. Its hands are nimble, but it lacks the crushing claws of a predator. Its teeth are blunt, useless for tearing flesh from a bone. In the brutal calculus of survival, this Homo sapiens seems poorly equipped. Yet, within its skull, something unprecedented is unfolding. Its brain is not merely larger, it is different. It is a furnace of possibilities, and the fuel is not just logic, but something far more potent: imagination. Why would evolution, that ruthless editor of life, invest so heavily in a faculty that seems, at first glance, to have little to do with the immediate business of eating and not being eaten? The answer lies not in the cold calculus of problem-solving, but in the warm, flickering light of shared experience. The Homo sapiens brain did not simply expand its capacity for analyzing threats or memorizing food sources. Its most explosive growth occurred in regions like the prefrontal cortex, a landscape intricately wired for dreaming, for empathy, for weaving narratives. This was not a supercomputer for survival. It was a theater for the mind. It allowed an individual to hold not just a memory of a past event, but a vision of a future one. It enabled the feeling of another's fear or joy as if it were their own. This neural architecture turned social bonds from mere alliances into the very fabric of reality. A shared belief, a common story, could bind a group together more powerfully than any chain. We can still step into this nascent world of the mind. The caves of Lascaux are not simply galleries of ancient art. They are cathedrals of consciousness. To stand in their profound silence is to feel the echo of a thought. The paintings of bulls and horses are not just depictions of prey. They are symbols, pulsating with meaning. Archaeologists suggest these spaces were not passive museums, but active, multi-sensory experiences. The flicker of torchlight would have animated the figures, making them breathe on the stone walls. The acoustics in certain chambers amplify sound, turning a human voice into a resonant, otherworldly chant. This was not decoration. This was the first external hard drive for the human soul, a place where the internal world of myth and memory was projected outward, made tangible, and shared. It was the birth of a collective identity, stored not in genes, but in story. This legacy defines us still. What truly separates humanity is not our score on an IQ test, a metric of processing speed and logical deduction. It is our profound, often irrational capacity for imagination. It is the engineer who first envisions a wheel that does not yet exist. It is the grief of a parent that gives rise to rituals and beliefs in an afterlife. It is the ability to sit with a stranger and, through the exchange of stories, feel a thread of connection weave itself between two separate universes. Our greatest inventions, law, money, religion, art, are not physical objects but collective fictions, stories we all agree to believe in. They are the invisible architecture of our civilization, built entirely from the raw material of a shared imagination. But one might reasonably ask, what use is a story when your stomach is empty? In a world of scarcity, where every calorie of energy is precious, why would natural selection favor a brain that spends its resources daydreaming, composing songs, or painting on cave walls? It seems an extraordinary luxury, a dangerous diversion from the pragmatic work of survival. This is the paradox. Investing in imagination appears to be an evolutionary dead end, a frivolous expenditure of neural tissue that could be better used for sharper senses or faster reflexes. Perhaps the question itself is flawed. It assumes the sole purpose of a brain is survival. But the human brain, it seems, had a different, more ambitious purpose. Not just to exist within a world, but to create one. The stories told around a fire did more than pass the time. They built a common world of meaning that made survival worthwhile. They transformed a band of individuals into a culture, a people with a past and a future. The brain became a tool not for dominating nature, but for interpreting it, for finding patterns in the stars and spirits in the wind. It was the ultimate act of world-building. And so, if the mind was the loom, what was the shuttle that wove these first fragile threads of community? What external force provided the time, the safety, the mesmerizing focus that allowed these stories to be spun and shared, deepening their power with each telling? The answer flickers in the darkness. A primal warmth that softened more than just the tough meat of the hunt. It softened the human heart, creating a space where the story itself became the first true meal for the soul. When night falls, the world contracts to the circumference of a flickering flame. The ancient darkness, once a canvas for predators' eyes and the chilling wind, is pushed back. Here, in this primal circle of light and warmth, a new sound rises. It is not a howl of warning, nor a grunt of pure instinct. It is a voice, weaving words into patterns. A story is being told. Why here? Why now, with the scent of cooked meat still hanging in the air? The transformation began not in the mind, but in the gut. Before fire was a weapon, it was a tool. The simple, profound act of cooking food, applying flame to raw meat and tough tubers, unlocked a biological revolution. Heat breaks down fibers and complex proteins, pre-digesting our meals. This meant the body's long, arduous task of digestion was dramatically shortened, freeing up vast reserves of energy. Energy that was no longer needed solely for survival, but could be diverted to a new, power-hungry organ. The brain. The caloric windfall from cooked food provided the fuel for neural expansion. The time once spent chewing and processing raw sustenance was now available for something else. Gathered around the heat, their bellies full with less effort, our ancestors found themselves with a novel commodity, leisure. And in that space, the first murmurs of complex social bonding began. Archaeology offers a silent testament to this shift. The oldest hearths are not solitary scorch marks. They are often found at the center of things, surrounded by the discarded bones of shared meals and the worn stones of a gathering place. The evidence is stark. The first controlled fires coincide with the first evidence of communal circles. This was the birth of the first true community, a space defined not just by mutual need for safety, but by shared experience. The fire became the heart of the group, a focal point that drew eyes together and encouraged interaction. The crackling flames provided a reason to sit still, to face one another, to watch the play of light and shadow on familiar faces. In this cradle of warmth, language found its rhythm, and narrative found its audience. This ancient scene is not so distant from our modern reality. The family dinner table, for all its occasional strife, remains the last bastion of this primal ritual. It is the one place where the hyper-connected modern human is compelled to put aside the glowing rectangle, to sit down, and to look into the eyes of their tribe. We pass dishes, and, in doing so, we pass stories. We recount the day's hunt in the concrete jungle, the alliances formed, the threats navigated. We offer up our small triumphs and failures, seeking not just sustenance for the body, but connection for the soul. The conversation around the meal is the direct descendant of those fireside tales, a reaffirmation that we are not alone in our survival. But a skeptic might ask, did storytelling make the spear fly straighter? Did a well-told tale about the mammoth's path actually ward off the saber-toothed cat lurking in the dark? In a literal sense, no. The story had no tangible power over the physical dangers of the world. Its magic was subtler, more profound. The story was the first form of processed mental nourishment. It allowed a group to digest experience collectively, to learn without each member having to face the danger firsthand. It transformed individual memory into shared knowledge, building a repository of wisdom that outlasted any single life. It was the one thing cooked over that fire that never grew cold, its warmth lingering long after the embers died. And when the story ended, when the final words faded into the night and the fire sank into glowing coals, what then? In the ensuing silence, a new kind of emptiness would have made itself known. Not the emptiness of a hungry stomach, but the deeper, more perplexing void left by absence. When a member of the circle did not return from the hunt, when the cold took a child, when life simply ended, what did they do with that silence? The stories had filled the night with meaning, but what could fill the shape of a loss? When the first one died, what did the living do? Did they stand and stare, frozen by the sight of stillness, where there had been breath? Did they turn away, leaving the silent form to the elements, a problem to be avoided? Or did they do something else entirely? Something that would echo for millennia? Did they bend their backs, dig into the earth, and lay the body down with a tenderness that defied utility? Did they mark the skin with red ochre, place flowers in the stiffened hand, and in doing so, whisper the first question into the void? Is this all there is? This primordial moment, lost to time, might be the birthplace of ritual. It is a response not just to death, but to the profound emptiness it leaves behind. A space opens up, not only in the social fabric, but within the human mind itself, a chasm of unanswered questions. And into that chasm, we pour structure, we pour ceremony, we create a sequence of actions to hold the unholdable, to give shape to the shapeless dread. This is not merely about disposal, it is about definition. The emptiness, it seems, demands to be filled, and our most ancient answer has always been ritual. Deep within the folds of the human brain, in regions like the anterior cingulate cortex and the prefrontal cortex, neural pathways light up with the stark realization of mortality. This is not a cultural artifact, but a biological reality. Our brains are wired with a unique capacity to comprehend the finality of death, not just as an abstract concept, but as a personal, impending truth. This recognition triggers a cascade, the gut-wrenching pain of grief, the longing for what is lost, and a powerful, almost compulsive drive to do something. It is as if the mind, confronted with a paradox it cannot solve, the animate becoming inanimate, defaults to action. The hands must move, the body must engage when the understanding fails. This neurological imperative might be the very engine of ritual. The grief that paralyzes is also the grief that seeks expression through patterned, repetitive behavior. We rock back and forth, we chant, we prepare the body with meticulous care. Is this intricate dance of sorrow simply the brain's way of managing an overwhelming cognitive load, of creating order in the face of psychological chaos? Long before neuroscience, this impulse was leaving its mark on the world, waiting in the silent dark for us to rediscover it. At a site like Kafsa in Israel, dating back nearly 100,000 years, we find graves that are more than just pits. The skeletons, often curled as if in sleep, are stained with red ochre, a pigment carried from distant sources. In one grave, the jawbone of a wild boar was carefully placed in the hand of a child. At Shanidar Cave, evidence suggests a Neanderthal was laid to rest on a bed of flowers, their pollen a ghostly signature of a final bouquet. These are not the acts of creatures merely tidying up a biological hazard. This is investment. This is intention. The ochre might have symbolized blood, life, or a journey to another world. The boar's jaw, a talisman or a tool for the afterlife. The flowers, an offering of beauty and scent to counteract decay. These gestures speak a universal language of care that transcends species. They are the archaeological proof of a mind looking into the abyss and deciding to throw something beautiful into it. What compelled them to use their precious energy, to venture far for colorful earth, to gather blooms, for one who could no longer see or appreciate the effort? Was it love, or was it a deeper, more instinctual need to assert meaning onto meaninglessness? This ancient need did not fade with the advent of modernity. It simply found new vessels. The contemporary funeral, with its prescribed order of visitation, service, and burial, serves a function that is almost entirely for the living. The person who has died is beyond needing comfort, but the community left behind is adrift in a sea of unstructured sorrow. The ritual provides a container for the chaos of grief. It gives us a part to play, the pallbearer, the speaker, the mourner. It tells us what to wear, where to sit, what to say. In the face of the ultimate disruption, it offers a script. Without this script, grief can become a form of disorder, a looping, unresolved trauma. The ritual does not erase the pain, but it formats it. It creates a narrative arc, a beginning, a middle, and a tentative end that allows the bereaved to slowly re-enter the stream of life. It is a collective agreement on how to behave when no behavior feels natural. But in this structured solace, a quiet rebellion stirs. If the ritual is a scaffold we build around the void, what happens when we decide the scaffold itself is an illusion? A counter-argument naturally arises, born of logic and a clear-eyed view of nature's cycles. If death is as natural as birth, as inevitable as the falling of leaves, why all this ceremony? Why not simply accept the fact and move on? Why clothe a biological certainty in the heavy garments of mysticism and sorrow? This perspective views ritual as a form of denial, a delaying tactic against the cold, hard truth of our material existence. To ritualize death, from this vantage point, is to sentimentalize it, to pretend it is something more than the simple cessation of function. It is an attempt to control what is fundamentally uncontrollable. Would we not be freer, more authentic, if we could look at the grave without the filter of ceremony? If we could acknowledge the loss, feel the pain, and then continue, unburdened by the weight of traditions that may feel hollow or imposed? Is the refusal to ritualize a more courageous, more honest way to meet the end? Perhaps, but the human heart seems to resist such pure rationality. The emptiness left by a loss is not a vacuum that can be ignored. It exerts a pressure, a gravitational pull on our thoughts and actions. Ritual, then, is not a denial of death's naturalness, but a response to the unnaturalness of its impact on the living. We are meaning makers. We are storytellers. The bare fact of decomposition is a story we cannot bear to leave untold. So we pour the concrete of ceremony into the empty space. We tell a story of legacy, of memory, of a spirit journeying on. The ritual is the mold we use to give a temporary, comprehensible shape to the incomprehensible. It is how we pour a kuon for the unthinkable. It is a way of holding the unholdable, if only for a moment. And when the silence that follows death becomes too loud, when the emptiness feels too vast, we turn, as our ancestors did, to the walls of our caves. we begin to draw. We draw the beasts that haunt us, the powers we cannot control, giving them form on stone so that we might, in some small way, hold the leash. The ritual of the grave finds its parallel in the ritual of the image. Both are attempts to manage the unmanageable. After we have laid our loved ones to rest with ochre and flowers, we are left with the lingering fear they faced, the fear we all must face. And so we pick up a piece of charcoal, and we trace the outline of a lion on the cave wall. Is this act of creation the next inevitable step, not a conclusion to the mystery of death, but a way of living alongside it? If we can capture the thunderous charge of the aurochs in pigment and line, have we not, in some small way, begun to tame the chaos of a world where life is perpetually shadowed by its end? In the profound darkness of the Chauvet cave, a lion emerges from the stone. Drawn in charcoal, its mane a series of flowing, powerful waves, it is captured not in a moment of serene beauty, but in a posture of latent threat. This is not a portrait of admiration. The lines traced by a hand tens of thousands of years ago seem to be an act of confrontation. To look at it is to feel not that the artist was celebrating the beast, but that they were trying, stroke by deliberate stroke, to hold it still, to master it. Here, in the flickering light of a tallow lamp, the first act of a profound human ritual unfolded, the act of drawing the predator to disarm the fear it inspires. Our brains are ancient instruments, tuned for survival in a world full of teeth and claws. Deep within the temporal lobe, a small, almond-shaped cluster of neurons called the amygdala acts as a sentinel. It is our primal alarm system, hardwired to snap our attention toward potential danger. The sudden movement in the grass, the silhouette of a large carnivore. When it fires, it bypasses our slower, rational cortex, flooding the body with stress hormones, preparing us to fight or flee. This is the biology of fear, an essential and visceral legacy. But the human mind possesses a second, more recently evolved gift, the prefrontal cortex, the seat of reason and planning. It allows us to simulate, to imagine, to run scenarios without moving a muscle. When the early artists chose to render the lion on the cave wall, they were engaging in a delicate neurological dance. They were deliberately triggering the amygdala's recognition. Here is the threat, but then immediately bringing the full force of their conscious focus to bear upon it. By controlling the image, by deciding its form and its placement, they were not running from the fear. They were sitting with it. They were, in a very real sense, practicing a form of emotional self-regulation, using the threat's own image to drain it of its paralyzing power. The drawing becomes a cage of cognition, a way to observe the storm from a place of relative safety. Is this the fundamental purpose of art, then, not to create beauty, but to build a container for our terrors? The archaeological record whispers this truth across millennia. The caves of Lascaux, Altamira, and Chauvet are not random galleries of local fauna. The depictions are overwhelmingly dominated by the most powerful, the most dangerous animals. The mammoths with their crushing tusks, the charging aurochs, the cave bears and lions. Significantly, these images are often found deep within the earth, in chambers that are difficult to access, far from the mouth of the cave where daily life occurred. These were not public squares. They were sanctuaries. One can almost feel the atmosphere, the damp chill, the oppressive silence broken only by the crackle of a flame, the scent of ochre and smoke. In these hidden spaces, surrounded by the very creatures that posed a mortal threat outside, our ancestors performed a ritual. By painting the hunter and the hunted, the predator and the prey, they were not merely recording a hunt for instructional purposes. They were engaging in a form of symbolic magic, a psychological preparation. To face the image of the lion in the controlled environment of the cave was to rehearse for facing the real lion on the open plain. It was an attempt to transfer the chaos of the wild into the order of the symbol, to make the unpredictable predictable. What does it say about us that our earliest known sacred spaces are not temples to gods, but chambers dedicated to the contemplation of our own mortality? This impulse did not vanish with the end of the Ice Age. It simply found new forms. A child, afraid of the monsters in the closet, is given a piece of paper and crayons. Draw the monster, a parent might say, and the child does. With wide, frantic strokes, they give form to the formless fear. The monster now has 3 eyes and purple polka dots. It has been captured. It is no longer an infinite, unknown terror lurking in the shadows. It is a finite drawing on a piece of paper. The child has externalized the internal, and in doing so, gained a measure of control. Adults are not so different. Why do we willingly subject ourselves to horror films, to stories that make our hearts race and our palms sweat? We pay to be terrified. In the safe container of a cinema, we confront serial killers, ancient curses, and apocalyptic scenarios. We are, in effect, entering a modern-day Chauvet cave. We are practicing fear. In a world where the immediate threats of predation have largely receded, these narratives become the new proving grounds for our courage. They allow us to explore the edges of our vulnerability, to feel the adrenaline rush of danger, and then to walk out into the safe, mundane world, having survived. Are we, in our sophisticated modernity, still seeking out dark caves in which to draw our own symbolic lions? Yet, a pragmatic voice might interject, a skeptical whisper from the back of the cave. What is the real use of this? If drawing a lion does not kill the lion, what is its value? If a child's sketch does not make the monster disappear, is it not just a pretty lie? Wouldn't the time be better spent forging a sharper spearhead, practicing a more accurate throw, or reinforcing the walls of the shelter? This is the argument of pure utility, the logic of immediate survival, and it holds a certain undeniable weight. Art does not fill the stomach. A song cannot physically ward off a predator. The act of drawing does not, in any material way, change the external threat. It is an investment of precious time and energy into something that offers no tangible reward. This is the eternal tension between the world of matter and the world of meaning. The skeptic champions the club, while the artist wields the symbol. But what if the most formidable enemy was never the beast outside, but the panic within? A terrified hunter with a perfect spear is a danger to themselves and their group. A community paralyzed by fear is doomed, regardless of its stockpile of resources. The drawing, then, is not a weapon against the lion. It is a tool for fortifying the mind of the lion killer. It is a form of psychological training, as crucial as physical training. But can a tool that works only on the interior world ever be considered as vital as one that works on the exterior? Perhaps the answer lies not in the individual, but in the collective. Fear is a profoundly isolating experience. In the dead of night, when the strange sound echoes, each person feels their own private dread. But when that fear is given a shared form, when the entire clan gathers before the painted lion on the cave wall, the experience is transformed. The private terror becomes a communal challenge. The artwork becomes a focal point, a shared reference. By looking at the same image, the group's heartbeats may begin to synchronize, their breathing to slow to a common rhythm. The act of collective looking is an act of mutual reassurance. We see it too. We are afraid together, and together, we are facing it. This is where the individual act of coping blossoms into the social act of culture making. The drawing is no longer just a personal therapeutic exercise. It is a ritual that binds the community together against the common darkness. It creates a shared narrative, a collective strength that is greater than the sum of its individual parts. The fear, once a force of fragmentation, is now harnessed as a force of unity. Could it be that the first step toward building a civilization was not the invention of the tool, but the creation of a shared symbol that told a group, "Your fear is my fear, and we will endure it together"? This communal thread, spun from the very fibers of our anxiety, leads us to the next chamber of the human experience, For if the still image was our first method of collective coping, then rhythm and sound were surely our second. The beat of a drum, the resonant chime of a stalactite struck by stone, these are the next layer of the ritual. The art of the hand gives way to the art of the ear. A single drumbeat cuts through the night, a sound felt more than heard. No command is shouted, no order given, yet a dozen bodies begin to move as one. Their feet fall in time with the rhythm, a silent agreement written in muscle and bone. This is a power that bypasses the conscious mind, speaking directly to the primal wiring within. It is not a command to kill, but an invitation to unite. The sound does not sharpen a spear, it forges a tribe. This deep neurological synchrony is one of our oldest inheritances. Within the human brain lies a curious mechanism, a tendency for our motor functions to lock into an external pulse. When we hear a steady beat, our neurons fire in sympathy, compelling our bodies to tap a foot, nod a head, or fall into step. This is more than a simple reflex. It is a biological tool for social cohesion. For early humans, survival was a collective endeavor. A hunt required silent, coordinated movement. Foraging demanded a shared awareness. Defense relied on a unified front. Language, in its infancy, was likely too slow and clumsy for the split-second coordination needed in a crisis. But a rhythm, a pattern of sounds, could instantly orchestrate a group. It created a shared physiological state, aligning heartbeats and breaths, dissolving the space between you and I into a potent we. The rhythm became an invisible thread tying the individual to the collective, ensuring that the group moved not as a chaotic scramble, but as a single, purposeful organism. Could it be that our ability to create music was, first and foremost, a technology for survival, woven into us not for art's sake, but for life's? The archaeological record offers a silent testament to this ancient need for synchrony. Among the stone axes and bone needles found at early settlement sites, we discover other, more enigmatic objects. Slabs of sonorous rock, carefully shaped and struck to produce a range of tones. The lithophones, or stone chimes, often called the first pianos. There are drums fashioned from hollowed logs and animal skins, and flutes carved from the bones of birds. These were not weapons of war. Their placement, often in central gathering areas or burial sites, suggests a different purpose. They were the tools of congregation. Imagine the scene. As dusk settled and the fire was lit, someone would strike the resonant stones. The sound would ripple through the camp, a call that needed no translation. It drew people together, not for battle, but for ceremony, for mourning, for celebration. In the shared experience of the rhythm, social bonds were reinforced, hierarchies were acknowledged, and a collective identity was rhythmically hammered into existence. The music did not build walls to keep threats out. It built a hearth to draw people in. What does it say about us that some of our earliest technologies were designed not to break bones, but to harmonize hearts? This primal power of rhythm echoes loudly in our modern world, a ghost of our ancestral past haunting our present-day gatherings. We see it in the mesmerizing lockstep of a military parade, where the thunder of boots on asphalt creates a formidable illusion of a single, immense creature. We feel it in the sway of a protest crowd, chanting in unison, their shared rhythm generating a courage and solidarity that transcends individual fear. On a dance floor, strangers become a temporary tribe, their isolated movements dissolving into a collective flow dictated by the beat. In these moments, something profound occurs at a psychological level. The synchrony reduces the perception of otherness, dampening potential conflicts and amplifying feelings of trust and cooperation. The individual's burden is lightened, distributed across the shoulders of the group. The rhythm acts as a social glue, mending minor fractures and creating a temporary sanctuary of shared existence. But is this unity an authentic connection, or merely a hypnotic illusion of conformity? A surrender of the self to the safety of the swarm? A skeptical voice, cold and pragmatic, might interrupt this rhythmic reverie. What is the tangible value of stepping in time when the stomach is empty? What good is a beautiful melody when a predator is charging? In a world governed by the brutal arithmetic of calories and claws, music seems a frivolous distraction, a luxury that evolution should have ruthlessly selected against. Marching together doesn't fill a single belly. A shared song offers no protection from tooth and claw. This is the undeniable logic of the immediate, the stark reality of the predator's world. It is a world where the club is the final argument, and the strong eat while the weak perish. From this perspective, the time spent carving a flute or practicing a rhythm could be seen as a dangerous waste of energy. Energy better spent sharpening a spear or tracking game. Does the harmony of the group truly hold any weight against the singular, crushing power of hunger? The answer, perhaps, lies not in the moment of the attack, but in the long, quiet stretches between them. Moving in unison may not win a battle, but it is what prevents the army from disintegrating before the battle even begins. A group that is synchronized is a group that is cohesive. It is a group that shares food, protects its young, and tends to its sick. The individual who eats alone may be full tonight, but will likely perish tomorrow. The group that moves together, bound by the invisible threads of rhythm and ritual, may move more slowly, but it endures. It survives the droughts, the winters, the plagues that pick off the isolated and the divided. The sound of the stone chime did not kill enemies, but it ensured that there were more voices to sing the next song, more hands to hold the next tool, more hearts to beat in time against the silence of the wild. So, we are left with a tantalizing, almost heretical thought. In the grand, slow calculus of survival, could the ability to tell a story together, to create a shared rhythm and a common narrative, be a force more potent in the long run than brute force itself? This suggests a subtle but monumental shift in the story of power. The strong may seize the food, but it is the storyteller, the rhythm maker, who can truly lead. For leadership is not merely about being the most powerful individual. It is about inspiring trust, fostering loyalty, and maintaining the group's will to continue. The one who can weave a compelling narrative, who can orchestrate the rhythms that bind people together, holds a different kind of strength. This is the soft weapon in a hard world, a weapon that builds rather than breaks, that unites rather than divides. And if survival is the ultimate game, then which is the more strategic advantage? The force to take what you need today, or the art to ensure you have a tribe to share it with tomorrow? When the strong kill their prey, the one who knows how to speak makes the whole group follow. They do not carry a sword, yet they become the leader. This is the quiet paradox at the heart of our ascent. Long before we forged steel, we forged consensus. Long before we built walls, we built belief. In a world governed by the hard laws of tooth and claw, a different kind of power was emerging, one that was soft, intangible, and ultimately more enduring. This is the story of art, not as a luxury, but as a fundamental tool of survival, the soft weapon in a hard world. Consider the human brain, a labyrinth of ancient instincts and new, dazzling potentials. Deep within its folds, in the regions that light up with fear or desire, lies a crucial crossroads. Here, the capacity for social influence is inextricably linked to the neural pathways of imagination and emotion. It is a biological inheritance written into our very code. To persuade is not merely to argue. It is to invite another consciousness to step into a shared vision, to see a future that does not yet exist. This act of co-creation requires a leap of faith, a temporary suspension of individual skepticism for the sake of a collective possibility. The brain that can imagine a successful hunt and then communicate that vision with such vivid urgency that others feel its reality holds a power far greater than simple physical strength. It builds the invisible architecture of trust, the scaffold upon which tribes and eventually civilizations would be built. Is the shared dream, then, a more potent reality than the solitary fact? The evidence of this soft power is etched not in stone tablets of law, but in the ochre strokes on a cave wall. Archaeology offers us whispers from the deep past, and they speak not of warriors, but of visionaries. In the flickering torchlight of Chauvet or Lascaux, we find complex paintings of animals, rendered with an anatomical precision and a dynamic grace that transcends mere notation. These were not simple how-to guides for hunting. They were something more profound. Alongside these masterpieces, we find meticulously crafted beads from ostrich eggshells, delicate figurines, tools that serve no obvious practical purpose beyond adornment or ritual. Crucially, the sites containing the most sophisticated art often coincide with evidence of seasonal gatherings, of larger, more organized groups. The individuals who possessed the skill and the time to create such things were not the strongest hunters, burdened with the daily grind of survival. They were likely the ones who held the group together, the storytellers, the shamans. Their art was the currency of cohesion, a visual language that bound the tribe to a common identity, to a shared understanding of their world and their place within it. Did the leader emerge because they could paint the bison, or did painting the bison consecrate them as the leader? This ancient dynamic finds its clear echo in the boardrooms and political arenas of the modern world. Contemporary leadership, from global corporations to nation-states, has long since transcended the crude metric of physical dominance. The CEO does not command by being the strongest person in the room. They lead by articulating a vision, a story, that aligns the efforts of thousands. The politician wins not by force, but by crafting a narrative of hope, fear, or belonging that resonates with a multitude. They trade in symbols, in logos, in slogans that tap directly into the same emotional and imaginative wells first accessed by those Paleolithic artists. The power to frame the story is the power to define reality for others. It is the soft weapon that builds empires and topples them, that launches products and inspires movements. When we follow a leader, are we submitting to a person or to the story they have mastered telling? Yet, a persistent, pragmatic voice pushes back from the shadows of our primal past. Can a beautiful song fend off a predator? Can a poignant story fill an empty stomach? In the brutal calculus of immediate survival, muscle and speed are the undeniable currencies. The lion does not negotiate with the gazelle. The storm does not care for our poetry. This is the counter-argument. That art, storytelling, persuasion, these are luxuries afforded by surplus. They are the delicate flowers that bloom only when the soil is rich and the climate is calm, the first to wither when the winter of true hardship arrives. Strength, in its most basic form, is what decides who eats and who is eaten. Isn't the club in the final desperate moment more real than the cradle? But what is survival, if not a long game? The strong individual may win the battle, but it is the cohesive group, bound by shared stories and common symbols, that wins the war against time, against scarcity, against rival tribes. The strongest hunter, if gravely wounded, becomes a liability, a drain on precious resources. In the unforgiving logic of the wild, they may be left behind. But the storyteller, the keeper of myths and the weaver of social bonds, when the group moves, they are carried. Their value is not in their individual strength, but in their role as the glue of the collective. They are the living library of identity, the architect of morale. Their survival is tied to the survival of the group itself. So, who truly lasts longer? The solitary force of nature or the central node in a network of belief? And in our own defining moments, when the veneer of civilization grows thin and instinct takes over, what do we reach for? We do not simply grunt or swing blindly. We repeat the stories. We chant the slogans. We hum the familiar songs. We grasp for the symbols that remind us of who we are. We seek the comfort of a narrative, even a terrifying one, over the yawning silence of chaos. This repetition is not a sign of fragility, but a profound strategy for endurance. It is an attempt to impose a familiar order onto an unfamiliar terror, to find a thread of meaning in the labyrinth of chance. This compulsive return to pattern, this need to reenact, suggests that the power of art and story is not an escape from reality, but a fundamental way of engaging with it. The rituals that shape our lives, from the solemnity of a funeral to the celebration of a birth, were not born from established religions. They emerged from something more primal, more haunting. They were born from the obsessive repetition that follows a significant event. When faced with the profound mystery of death, the miracle of new life, or the stark transition from hunger to plenty, what did we do? We did it again, and again, as if by tracing the steps, we could uncover a purpose hidden within the accident, a signal in the noise. If art is the soft weapon, then is ritual its inevitable echo, the groove worn deep into the path of human experience by the relentless traffic of meaning-making. The successful hunt ends not with silence, but with a rhythm of feet stamping the earth, of hands clapping, of voices rising in a chorus that is neither a song nor a speech, but something older than both. A body falls, and the community gathers. There is no scripture to consult, no priest to officiate. Instead, hands reach for red ochre, grinding it to a fine powder, and with a gesture that feels as inevitable as a breath, they let it fall upon the still form. No one decreed this dance, no one mandated this offering of color. It was simply repeated. And in that repetition, over generations uncounted, something shifted. The accidental became the customary. The random gesture hardened into ritual. But this ritual was not born from a divine commandment etched in stone. It was born from the quiet, obsessive power of repetition itself, a human attempt to carve a pattern into the chaos of existence. The human brain is a machine for finding patterns, a relentless seeker of cause and effect in a world that often offers only coincidence. Deep within its ancient structures lies the reward system, a network that floods the body with a sense of well-being when a pattern is recognized, when a prediction comes true. To our earliest ancestors, survival was a gamble against an unpredictable world. When a specific action, a particular way of tracking prey, a sequence of movements before a storm, coincided with a desired outcome, the brain took note. Repeating that action became a neurological imperative. It was less about superstition and more about neurochemistry. The ritual offered a dopamine-fueled promise of control. Facing the immense uncertainty of death, of the hunt, of the seasons, the repetitive act became an anchor. It did not need to be logical. It needed to be consistent. It created a familiar script for the most unfamiliar of events, a scaffold of behavior upon which the terrifying weight of the unknown could be rested. Was the dance what made the bison return? Or was the dance what made the hunters believe they could make the bison return? In the mind's deep circuitry, the distinction may have been irrelevant. The feeling of safety was the reward, and repetition was the key that unlocked it. This neurological impulse left its mark not in flesh, but in stone and sediment. The archaeological record whispers of these early rituals, not as grand temples, but as subtle, stubborn echoes of behavior. In a cave, a footprint is preserved in soft clay, not a single print, but a trail, indicating that someone walked the same path, deep into the mountain's heart, again and again. On a rock shelter wall, handprints are stenciled in pigment, and the same motif, a spiral, a series of dots, appears in sites separated by millennia and continents. The placement of stones around a burial site follows a pattern so consistent it cannot be accidental. These are not the flamboyant declarations of a formed religion, but the quiet, persistent grammar of a practice being learned by a species. The power was in the near-perfect replication. Each performance was a thread in a tapestry woven across time, connecting the living to the dead and the present to the past, not through dogma, but through the deeply comforting rhythm of the familiar. The ritual was the original time capsule, and its contents were not objects, but actions. What were they trying to preserve so meticulously, if not a feeling, a connection, that would be lost if the steps were ever changed? We, the modern heirs to these deep time practices, have not escaped this pull. We have merely dressed it in new clothes. Our own rituals, the solemn procession of a wedding, the structured condolences of a funeral, the predictable cadence of a court trial, serve the same fundamental purpose. They are, in essence, emotional defaults. When joy is too overwhelming, or grief too paralyzing, the ritual provides a pre-written script. It tells us where to stand, what to say, how to feel. It externalizes the internal chaos, giving it a form that can be shared and collectively endured. The wedding ceremony channels the tumult of love and commitment into a series of vows and exchanges, making the abstract tangible. The funeral gives shape to the formless void of loss, offering a pathway through the grief. We do not invent these scripts in the moment of crisis. We inherit them, and we repeat them. Because in the face of life's most profound transitions, the last thing we can afford is improvisation. The ritual is a cage, but it is a cage that protects us from falling into an abyss. Is the comfort we find in ritual a genuine solace, or is it simply the brain's ancient reward for following a known path, for choosing a mapped territory over an uncharted wilderness? A skeptic might ask, if these repetitions are so ingrained, why do they persist even when their practical utility has faded? If a rain dance never brings rain, why does the dance continue? This question assumes that the primary function of ritual is to manipulate the external world. But perhaps its true power lies in its ability to manipulate the internal landscape. The rain dance may not change the sky, but it changes the people performing it. It transforms anxiety into purposeful action, individual fear into collective resolve. It forges a community bound not by success, but by shared endeavor. The repetition becomes a form of conditioning, not for the environment, but for the human spirit, training it to endure hardship with a sense of agency and solidarity. The ritual is a tool for building resilience, a psychological technology far more ancient than any plow or wheel. When the world refuses to conform to our desires, do we not turn inwards, creating order within ourselves because we cannot find it outside? This leads us to a quieter, more intimate dimension of repetition. There are caves, deep and inaccessible, where the walls are adorned with breathtaking art. Animals leap in flickering torchlight, their forms masterfully rendered. Yet these galleries are found in chambers that would have been terrifyingly difficult to reach, places where no natural light ever penetrated, where no audience could ever have gathered. This was not public spectacle. This was private repetition. The act of drawing the same bison, the same mammoth over and over in the profound darkness, suggests a ritual devoid of an audience. It was a conversation with the self, with the spirit of the animal, with the mystery of existence. The value was not in the finished product, but in the act of creation itself, a repetitive, obsessive act of understanding. The art was not for display. It was for the maker. It was a ritual of deep, personal integration, a way of capturing the essence of the world outside and making it a part of the world within. In the silent, starless dark of the cave, the artist was not performing for gods or humans, but engaging in the most fundamental ritual of all, the repetition that leads to mastery, not of a skill, but of a fear, of a wonder, of a relationship with the world. So we are left with a paradox. We repeat to feel safe, to create order, to belong. But the most profound repetitions seem to occur when we are most alone, when the only audience is the darkness and the echo of our own actions. This suggests that ritual, in its purest form, may be less about communication with others and more about a dialogue with the deepest parts of our own consciousness. It is a way of processing the unprocessable, of circling a truth too vast to be apprehended directly. We repeat not because we have found an answer, but because the act of repetition itself is the only way we know to ask the question. And if the first rituals were born from a need to impose order on a chaotic world, then what does it mean that our most enduring artistic impulses, the private, repeated acts of creation, suggest a need to impose order on the chaos within? Is the ritual, ultimately, a mirror we hold up not to the gods, but to the mysterious workings of our own minds? In the profound, silent dark of a cave, so deep that the air itself feels ancient and the ceiling forces a crouch, a human hand once moved. There was no audience in that lightless chamber, no torchlight to properly illuminate the wall, no applause to anticipate. Yet the ochre and charcoal clung to the stone, tracing the powerful flowing lines of a bison. For millennia, these images existed in absolute solitude, known only to the one who made them and the unblinking rock. This act, repeated in hidden places across the ancient world, whispers a question that echoes through time. If a story is told, and no one is there to hear it, does it cease to be a story? The existence of art in the absence of an observer suggests that the deepest wellspring of creation may not be the desire for an audience, but a fundamental biological need to give form to the formless within. The impulse to create begins not as a social contract, but as a private neurological event. Deep within the human brain, the act of translating thought and emotion into a line, a shape, a symbol, functions as a kind of internal pressure valve. It is a process of externalizing the inner landscape. Consider the sheer visceral need to doodle in the margins of a notebook during a long meeting, the unconscious tracing of patterns with a finger on a misted window. This is not performance, it is cognitive housekeeping. The brain, a relentless generator of images, fears, and wonders, sometimes requires a conduit to the outside world, a way to make the internal chaos tangible. By rendering a feeling of awe before a mammoth, or the sharp sting of grief for a lost companion, onto a wall, the creator is not necessarily seeking a viewer. They are seeking clarity. They are having a conversation with themselves, using their own hands as the medium. The art becomes a mirror, not a window. In the silent dialogue between the self and the created image, does the act of creation itself complete the circuit of meaning, rendering an audience superfluous to the primary function? The archaeological record offers a testament to this profoundly private relationship with creation. The most stunning Paleolithic art is often found not at the welcoming mouths of caves, but in their most remote, almost inaccessible depths. Reaching these chambers required crawling through narrow, muddy passages, navigating total darkness with only a flickering grease lamp for guidance. This was not a gallery space. This was a sanctuary. The difficulty of access itself speaks volumes. It suggests the act was paramount, and the product was perhaps secondary, or meant for eyes other than those of the everyday tribe. Perhaps these were spaces for ritual, where the act of drawing was the prayer, a way to connect with the spirit of the hunt, to exert a measure of control over the terrifying and magnificent forces of nature. Or perhaps it was a form of commemoration, a deeply personal memorial for a fallen hunter whose likeness was captured in the sacred dark, away from the mundane world. The location transforms the art from a broadcast into a secret, from a declaration to a whisper meant only for the cosmos, the ancestors, or the self. If the journey to the canvas is an ordeal, does that not imply that the value of the art is inextricably linked to the solitude and intention of its making? This ancient, solitary impulse has not been extinguished by the neon glare of modernity. It has simply found new vessels. The private journal, filled with scrawled confessions and unvarnished fears that will never be read by another soul. The sketchbook filled with half-formed figures and abstract color fields, never intended for a gallery wall. The voice memo recorded late at night, a spoken diary entry meant only for the speaker's own ears. These are all modern iterations of the cave painter in the deep chamber. In a world of constant connection and overwhelming noise, these acts are anchors. They are ways of keeping oneself, of carving out a small sovereign territory of the soul. The creation is a bulwark against the chaos, a proof of existence crafted not for the validation of others, but for the sanity of the self. The art is not a product to be consumed, but a process of preservation. In the quiet act of writing or drawing for an audience of one, are we not engaging in the most ancient form of self-care, asserting our individuality against the tide of collective experience? Yet, a compelling counter-argument rises from this very line of thought. Is not the very essence of art, its lifeblood, found in the space between the creator and the beholder? We are social creatures, and our expressions seem to yearn for a shared resonance. A story gains its full power in the telling, a song in the hearing. Can something truly be called art if it exists in a vacuum, if it never sparks a thought or stirs an emotion in another consciousness? Is the private diary, profound as it may be, equivalent to a novel that shapes a generation's perspective? This perspective frames art as a bridge, a form of communication that is inherently relational. Without the potential for connection, does the act risk collapsing into mere self-indulgence, a solipsistic loop without a recipient? The value of art, in this view, is amplified, if not created, by its ability to traverse the lonely space between individuals and create a shared understanding. Perhaps this dichotomy is a false one. Perhaps the first art was never about communication in the modern intentional sense. It was not a message in a bottle tossed into the social sea. It was, first and foremost, about coexistence. It was the human mind's way of learning to live with its own overwhelming contents. The fear of death, the thrill of the hunt, the mystery of birth. By projecting these forces outward, giving them a shape and a name on the cave wall, our ancestors could begin to manage them. The art was a tool for survival as crucial as a spear, but its battlefield was the interior world. The act of creation was the point. The existence of the artifact was a byproduct, a fossil of an emotional event. And in that act of defining an internal feeling by giving it an external form, another, more subtle process was also at work. The maker was not just managing emotion. They were, in a fundamental way, marking themselves. For if the first art was a way of being, of coping with the chaos within, then the next logical step was to use creation to answer the most basic question of all: who am I? The hand that painted the bison in the dark was attached to a body, a person who belonged to a group, who had a role, a status, a story. How did that individual choose to declare their identity to the world and to themselves? What are the marks we make not on stone, but on our very skin? And what do they say about the tribes we belong to? The lines we draw between us and them. On the sun-baked skin of a man who lived 5,000 years ago, a story was etched in charcoal and ochre. It was not a story of words, but of identity. Spirals coiled around the muscle of his arm. Lines were raked into his flesh like scars from a sacred beast. Dots of red pigment bloomed like ancient constellations. This was not mere decoration, an early flourish of aesthetic vanity. This was a declaration, a classification carved into the very medium of the self. It answered the most fundamental and dangerous question one human could ask another: who are you? In the silent language of symbols, the tattoo replied, I am of the people of the spiral. I have passed the initiation. I am a hunter. I belong. This primal impulse to mark the body is a thread woven deep into the fabric of our being, a biological and social technology far older than writing. It speaks to a neurological reality. The human brain is exquisitely tuned to visual cues of group membership. Long before we evolved complex language, our survival depended on the rapid, instinctual assessment of friend or foe. The brain's visual cortex, in concert with regions like the fusiform gyrus responsible for facial recognition, developed a hypersensitivity to patterns that signal belonging. The subtle differences in skin tone, the specific arrangement of features, the unique pigmentation, these were the original identifiers. But we, the storytellers, the symbol makers, took this biological given and transformed it. We began to paint our own identifiers onto the canvas of our skin, creating a shorthand for trust in a world where trust was a matter of life and death. Was this the birth of culture itself, not in a cave painting, but on the living, breathing surface of a human arm? The archaeological record is a gallery of these lost identities. From the frozen tombs of the Siberian Pazyryk, where chieftains were buried with intricate animal tattoos still visible on their skin, to the ochre-stained shells found in Blombos Cave, South Africa, suggesting bodily adornment dating back 75,000 years, the evidence is overwhelming. These were not random acts of beauty. They were a sophisticated, non-verbal language. A specific pattern of dots might denote a youth who had just undergone a rite of passage, his childhood literally scarred over to make way for the man. A necklace of bear teeth was not just an ornament. It was a resume, a testament to courage and skill, instantly communicating status to any member of the tribe. The red ochre painted on the cheeks of a woman might signal that she was of childbearing age, or that she held a specific spiritual role. Every mark was a word in a silent social contract, defining an individual's place within a delicate hierarchy of age, role, and ritual. The body became a walking, talking ledger of one's life and standing. Could the first form of bureaucracy, then, have been written not on clay tablets, but on human skin? This ancient grammar of belonging has not faded. It has simply evolved its lexicon. We, the moderns, like to believe we have transcended such tribal instincts. We wear suits of synthetic fibers instead of animal hides, and we carry slim rectangles of glass and metal instead of talismans of bone. But look closer. The corporate logo emblazoned on a polo shirt is the modern-day clan symbol, signaling allegiance to the tribe of Apple or Adidas. The crisp cut of a business suit is a uniform as distinct as any warrior's regalia, marking one as a member of the managerial class. The intricate tattoo sleeve on a barista's arm is no less a statement of identity than the spiral on the ancient hunter's bicep. It speaks of subcultures, personal milestones, and artistic tribes. Even the deliberate rejection of markers, the minimalist aesthetic, is itself a powerful signal. It says, "I belong to the tribe of those who reject tribes." We are still painting ourselves with the pigments of affiliation, using the language of fashion, brand loyalty, and body modification to constantly answer that primordial question: who are you? In a world of billions, is this relentless self-branding not just a desperate, amplified version of the same ancient need to be seen and to be placed? A skeptic might rightly ask, if survival is the ultimate goal, why engage in such a potentially costly activity? The process of tattooing is painful and carries a risk of infection. Adorning oneself with heavy, conspicuous jewelry could impede flight from a predator. To deliberately mark oneself is to make oneself more visible, not just to allies, but also to enemies. It is to exchange a measure of individual camouflage for the power of collective identity. This is the paradox at the heart of the mark. The very symbol that grants you safety within your group can make you a target outside of it. The same tattoo that earns you respect from your clansmen might mark you for death in the territory of a rival tribe. So, why do it? The calculation must be that the protection offered by the group, the shared hunting, the collective defense, the pooled resources, outweighs the increased risk from the outside. It is a wager on belonging. But is it a conscious wager, or an impulse so deep that it bypasses logic altogether? A siren call of the social brain that whispers that to be alone is to be vulnerable, no matter how well camouflaged? Perhaps the answer lies in a deeper truth. Survival is not merely a physical state, it is a psychological one. To be alive is one thing, but to be alive and alone is a different kind of death. The need to belong, to be part of something larger than the self, is a drive as fundamental as hunger or thirst. We are not built for solitude. The mark on the skin is the external proof of an internal reality. I am not alone. It is a covenant written in ink, pigment, and scar tissue. It is a promise to others and a reminder to oneself. But this belonging demands a price. It requires a synchronization, a letting go of one's own unique rhythm. The mark is the first step, the visual declaration. But the true bond is forged in something more fleeting, more immediate. It is forged in movement, in breath, in sound that rises and falls as one. And if there were no instruments, no drums or flutes, how would this synchrony begin? Perhaps with the simplest of sounds, the meeting of hands, a single clap, then another, and soon a rhythm emerges, not from a leader, but from the group itself. This ability to fall into a shared beat, to chant in unison, to move as a single entity, is a neurological marvel almost unique to humans. It is a force that binds a group together more powerfully than any command, any law, or any mark on the skin. For the mark says, "I belong." But the shared rhythm makes the question of belonging irrelevant, because in that moment there is no I at all. Is the ultimate mark of belonging, then, not something you wear but a rhythm you become? A child who has not yet learned to speak hears a rhythm and begins to clap. The small hands meet, not with the clumsy uncertainty of infancy, but with a startling, innate precision. It is an act devoid of instruction, a spontaneous synchronization that seems to bypass the conscious mind. This simple, universal gesture raises a profound question. Why are we, as a species, so deeply wired to find and follow a beat? What ancient conversation is happening between the rhythm in the air and the rhythm in our bodies? The answer may lie not in the concert hall, but in the very architecture of our brains. Neuroscientists have discovered that the ability to perceive a regular pulse and synchronize our movements to it, a skill known as beat-based entrainment, is a rare phenomenon in the animal kingdom. While some parrots can bob their heads and a handful of other creatures might show glimpses of rhythm, the consistent, predictive, and joyful alignment of complex motion to an external beat appears to be a uniquely human signature. This talent is deeply entangled with the brain's motor and auditory cortices, but more significantly, it is lit up by the regions governing social bonding and emotion: the cerebellum, the basal ganglia, and the limbic system. The beat, it seems, is not first processed as sound, but as a social invitation. It is a neurological handshake, a way for one nervous system to signal to another, I am here, with you, in this same moment. Could it be that our capacity for music predates, and perhaps even paved the way for, our capacity for complex language? That before we learned to articulate words, we learned to synchronize our hearts? Long before the first flute was carved from bone, our ancestors were making music with the instrument they were born with, their own bodies. On the walls of ancient caves, alongside paintings of majestic prey, we find the ghostly impressions of human hands. These are not simply signatures. Some are stencils, created by blowing pigment over a hand pressed against the rock. Others show palms dusted with ochre or charcoal pressed firmly to the stone surface. One can almost hear the echo of the ritual, the deep, percussive sound of hands striking the rock, the cloud of colored powder exploding with each impact, the rhythmic chanting that would have accompanied it. This was not entertainment. It was technology. It was a technology of belonging. In the flickering firelight of those deep caverns, the rhythm of clapping hands and stomping feet would have fused a group of individuals into a single breathing entity. There were no virtuosos, only participants. The music required no special skill, only a body and a willingness to join in. In that collective pulse, was the individual momentarily dissolved, or was it paradoxically where the individual found their most profound definition? This primal urge to synchronize persists in every modern crowd. Think of the spontaneous applause that erupts at the end of a powerful performance. It is not a collection of individual claps, but a single, rolling thunder of sound, a wave of approval that binds the audience together and returns energy to the performers. We chant in unison at sporting events. We sing together in places of worship. We dance in synchronized movements at clubs and celebrations. These are not arbitrary social customs. They are biological imperatives playing out on a cultural stage. The act of moving and sounding together releases a cascade of neurochemicals, endorphins and dopamine, that generate feelings of pleasure and trust. It lowers our psychological defenses and creates a powerful sense of shared identity, a collective effervescence that transcends language, ideology, and status. In a world increasingly defined by the isolated individual, does our need for the synchronized collective become even more acute? Is the standing ovation a faint echo of our ancestors stamping their feet in a dark cave, reassuring each other that they are not alone? Yet, a counter-argument whispers from the edges of evolutionary logic. If music and rhythm are so central to our being, what survival advantage did they confer? A sharp eye for predators, a strong arm for hunting, a shrewd mind for social manipulation. These are the currencies of natural selection. Where does a catchy tune fit in? It doesn't put food on the table or directly ward off danger. In fact, the loud, rhythmic drumming and clapping in a primordial valley might have very well attracted the very dangers it was meant to ward off. So why would the brain, that parsimonious organ, dedicate precious resources and neural real estate to processing something as seemingly frivolous as a beat? Perhaps the question itself is flawed, born from a utilitarian view of existence that prioritizes mere survival over the quality of that survival. Maybe the brain prioritizes rhythm because it recognizes it as a message of paramount importance, not about the location of food, but about the state of the tribe. The beat is a signal of social cohesion, a vital sign of a healthy group. In the harsh arithmetic of evolution, a cohesive group has a far greater chance of long-term survival than a collection of brilliant but disconnected individuals. Could the music then be the message? And is the message simply, we are one? Perhaps the deepest truth is that rhythm, like shared fire or collective storytelling, is a fundamental technology of empathy. It is how we literally sync our heartbeats. When we clap together, when we march in step, when we dance to the same drum, our physiological rhythms begin to align. Our heart rates and breathing patterns can subtly synchronize, creating a state of shared biology. In those moments, the boundary between self and other softens. We become, in a very real sense, a temporary superorganism, a single entity with many hands and one pulse. This is the magic of the simplest music, the music that requires no instrument. It is a bridge built not of stone or word, but of time itself. It asks for nothing more than participation. And in the act of joining that rhythm, of surrendering our individual tempo to a collective one, we are transformed. We become part of something larger than ourselves. But does this merging elevate the individual or erase it? When we lose ourselves in the beat, what precisely do we become? This transformation of the self through collective ritual finds a powerful and perhaps more conscious expression in another ancient human technology. If rhythm allows us to sync our heartbeats, what happens when we choose to change our very face? What ancient magic lies in the act of concealment, and why does hiding one's identity so often feel like a more profound revelation? The air is thick with the scent of smoke and damp earth. The firelight dances, casting long, writhing shadows that seem to cling to the edges of the clearing. From the darkness, a figure emerges. Its movements are not entirely human. A stalking, deliberate gait, a tilt of the head that speaks of a different kind of consciousness. The face is not a face at all, but a mask. Carved from dark wood, it bears the visage of a stag, antlers reaching toward the sky like barren branches. The person beneath is gone, vanished behind the static wooden gaze. They are no longer a farmer, a parent, a child. They are an ancestor, a spirit of the forest, a nameless force given form. This is the ancient paradox of the mask, a device of concealment that, paradoxically, becomes an instrument of profound revelation. Does it hide our true nature, or does it, in fact, provide the very condition for its expression? We can begin to unravel this mystery not in the realm of spirits, but in the wet, gray matter of our own brains. Neuroscience offers a curious first clue. Our brains are exquisitely tuned face-processing machines. From infancy, we are hardwired to seek out the human face, to read its subtle configurations for signs of safety, threat, love, or anger. The fusiform gyrus, a specialized region, lights up like a constellation when we see a familiar countenance, allowing us to instantly recognize a friend in a crowd. But what happens when this expected map is altered or removed? When we encounter a mask, this sophisticated system stutters. The brain, craving the patterns it is built to decode, encounters an unsettling void where identity should be. This absence is not passive. It is an active stimulus. The mysterious, the uncanny, is triggered. The mask creates a cognitive dissonance. We see a human form, but the primary badge of individuality is obscured. This very act of hiding the specific person seems to make space for the perception of something larger, something archetypal. The individual recedes, and the symbol emerges. Is our capacity for the numinous, then, primed by a simple failure of recognition? A glitch in our neural wiring that opens a door to another way of seeing? This neurological doorway leads us directly to the silent testimonies buried in the ground. Archaeologists, brushing dust from ancient artifacts, find masks that are far more than decorative art. In the peat bogs of northern Europe, a leather mask survives, molded to the features of a long-vanished face. In the tombs of Mycenaean kings, masks of beaten gold preserve a stylized, eternal grimace. In the Americas, from the Olmec to the Northwest Coast tribes, masks of jade, wood, and copper depict jaguars, eagles, and ravens. These were not souvenirs. They were tools, perhaps among humanity's first virtual reality devices. They were transformation vehicles, designed to allow the wearer to step out of their mundane existence and into a role of supernatural significance. The shaman donning the bear mask was not pretending to be a bear. In the context of the ritual, fueled by chant and rhythm, he became the bear's spirit, channeling its strength and wisdom for the tribe. The mask was a conduit, a passport to a realm where the boundaries between human, animal, and deity became fluid. It allowed a community to see not their neighbor, but the embodiment of their myths, their fears, and their hopes. The mask mediated the relationship between the visible and the invisible worlds. It was a technology for making the intangible tangible. So, were these ancient practices a form of collective self-deception, or a sophisticated method of accessing deeper layers of reality that our conscious individual minds normally filter out? This impulse to step into another skin did not vanish with the arrival of modernity. It simply found new masks. We see it in the controlled chaos of the carnival, where elaborate costumes and masks grant a temporary license for mischief and social inversion. The quiet banker becomes a flamboyant jester, the reserved student a monstrous creature. We see it on the stage, where an actor uses the mask of character, sometimes literal, always metaphorical, to express truths too raw, too complex, or too dangerous for their own persona to hold. But perhaps the most pervasive modern mask is the digital avatar. Online, we craft identities with meticulous care, choosing profile pictures, crafting bios, and curating personalities. We can be wittier, braver, more vulnerable, or more detached than we might ever dare in the flesh. This is the act of shedding the old role and donning a new one. The keyboard becomes the modern mask maker's tool, allowing us to say the things we cannot say when we are constrained by the face we were born with. It is a release valve for the pressures of a fixed identity. But this liberation carries a shadow. The same mask that enables a shy person to find their voice can also embolden the troll to spew venom without consequence. The anonymity that fosters honesty can also cultivate deception. This duality forces us to confront a difficult counter-argument. If the mask conceals the individual, can the expression that emerges from behind it ever be considered authentic art? Or is it merely a clever fabrication, a performance built on a foundation of falsehood? Is the courage of the anonymous online commentator less valid because it is conditional on that anonymity? Is the profound emotion conveyed by an actor on stage nothing but a beautiful lie? This line of questioning suggests that truth must be naked, that authenticity is inextricably linked to the exposed, vulnerable self. From this perspective, the mask is a shield for the cowardly, a tool for the manipulator, a retreat from the responsibility of owning one's words and actions. It is the ultimate artifice. But this view assumes that our everyday, unmasked self is our only, our true self. What if that is the most limiting mask of all? Perhaps the final tentative observation is this: the mask does not simply hide or reveal a pre-existing monolithic self. Instead, it creates a new space for being. In the act of concealing the familiar, the particular, it forces a kind of death of the ego, and in that void, other aspects of the psyche, normally suppressed by social convention and personal history, are given permission to emerge. The stag mask allows the wearer to tap into an archetype of wildness and grace that exists as a potential within us all. The online avatar allows for the exploration of a confidence or a creativity that the individual may feel is inaccessible in their daily life. The mask, therefore, is not a barrier to truth, but a key to a different kind of truth. It is a crucible where identity is not displayed, but actively reforged. It suggests that our essence is not a single fixed point, but a constellation of possibilities. The profound act may not be the removal of the mask to show the real face underneath, but the recognition that we are composed of many faces, each authentic in its own context. So, as the figure in the stag mask moves to the primal rhythm of the drums, its steps syncopated and ancient, we are left with a question that reverberates beyond the firelight. If the mask is the gateway, and the transformed self is the traveler, then what is the destination? The rhythm itself seems to pull the community, the masked figure, and the very air into a single throbbing entity. The beat is more than sound. It is a pulse, a summons, and in that collective heartbeat, where individual identities begin to dissolve into a larger whole, one must wonder, is the drumbeat merely the soundtrack for the transformation, or is it the true architect of the journey, building a bridge to a state of being where the very concept of a mask becomes meaningless? The sound begins not as a sound, but as a vibration in the earth, a single resonant thump that travels up through the soles of the feet, a signal felt before it is heard, then another and another. In the fire-lit circle, the rhythm takes hold, a simple, insistent pulse that seems to bypass the ears and speak directly to the spine. The dancers move, not as individuals with separate wills, but as parts of a single, breathing organism. Their shouts and cries are not expressions of personal joy or sorrow, but the exhalations of a collective body. The I dissolves, its boundaries washed away by the relentless wave-like cadence. What remains is a profound and ancient we. This is the secret hidden within the drumbeat. It is not merely music. It is a technology of the soul, a biological and psychological key that unlocks a door to a shared consciousness. The drum's power lies in its primal simplicity. It does not argue. It pulses. It does not persuade. It entrains. Our own bodies are rhythmic systems, the constant lub-dub of the heart, the steady in and out of the lungs. A steady, repetitive beat acts as an external pacemaker, coaxing these internal rhythms into synchrony. Brainwave patterns, normally a chaotic chorus of individual thought, begin to align, sliding into coherent, unified states. This neural harmony is chemically rewarded. The brain releases a cascade of dopamine, the molecule of anticipation and pleasure, and, more crucially, oxytocin, the famed bonding hormone that underpins trust, empathy, and social connection. The ecstatic state experienced around the communal fire is not a mystical abstraction, but a measurable neurochemical event, a collective trance engineered by rhythm. The archaeological record offers silent, enduring testimony to this ancient need. In digs scattered across the globe, from the deep caves of Europe to the open burial sites of ancient civilizations, we find the tools of this communion. A hollowed log with a stretched skin, a set of carefully shaped stones that ring when struck, bone flutes that mimic the cadence of breath. These instruments are rarely discovered in isolation. They are most often unearthed in places of profound communal significance, near ceremonial graves, within circles of standing stones, in the charred remains of central hearths. They were not for entertainment in the way we understand it today. They were the central nervous system of the tribe, the instrument through which joy was amplified, grief was shared, and fear was collectively faced. The rhythm was the glue that held the community together, transforming a group of individuals into a cohesive whole, capable of surviving the immense pressures of a hostile world. The drum was as essential as the spear or the fire. It was a tool for building the social organism itself. And this ancient wiring still hums with latent power beneath the thin veneer of modernity. We may have traded hide-covered drums for digital, sub-bass and fire-lit circles for laser-streaked warehouses, but the fundamental mechanism remains unchanged. In the throbbing heart of a rave, thousands of dancers move as one, their individual identities submerged in the beat, their bodies synced to the DJ's unwavering tempo. They are seeking, perhaps unknowingly, the same transcendence their ancestors found. This search has even found its way into modern therapy, where drum circles are used to help veterans with PTSD reconnect with a sense of safety and community, or to guide corporate teams toward a nonverbal experience of collaboration. It seems that in an age of hyper-individualism and digital isolation, we are drawn back to the drum. We are trying to find our way back to the we by rediscovering the primal rhythm that first created it. We are, in a sense, trying to remember a heartbeat that is not our own, but belongs to us all. Yet this very power carries a shadow. The same mechanism that forges powerful bonds can also dissolve critical thought. The ecstatic surrender of the individual will, so beautiful in a sacred context, can be a dangerous vulnerability. History is littered with demagogues who understood the power of rhythm and chant, who used repetitive slogans and marching songs to mesmerize crowds, to replace individual reason with a fervent, unquestioning collective identity. The line between a healing trance and a dangerous mob mentality can be perilously thin. Is the loss of self a transcendence or an abdication? Does the drum, in its ancient wisdom, offer a glimpse of a higher unity? Or does it simply switch off the lights of the individual mind, leaving us susceptible to the will of the loudest voice in the room? The state of collective ecstasy can feel like truth, but is it? Or is it merely an intoxicating illusion of truth, a powerful feeling that masquerades as knowledge? Perhaps the answer is not to be found in a simple judgment, but in a recognition of the drum's fundamental nature. It is a tool, and like any powerful tool, fire, the club, the word itself, its morality is determined by the hands that wield it and the heart that guides it. The rhythmic cradle that soothes and connects can, in a different context, become a weapon of control. The very thing that allows a community to feel a shared grief can also be used to direct a shared hatred. This duality is inherent. The drumbeat does not care if it synchronizes a healing ritual or a march to war. Its power is in the synchronization itself. So we are left with a resonance that echoes far beyond the archaeological site or the dance floor. It echoes in the very structure of our social lives. If the drum's rhythm is the prototype for collective feeling, then what are the modern-day rhythms that bind us? The chants in a sports stadium, the shared anticipation before a film's climax, the synchronized routines of daily life. And in a world that increasingly prizes the curated individual above all else, where our digital experiences are tailored to our unique preferences, are we losing the capacity for this shared pulse? Is our inability to find a common rhythm at the root of our deepening social fractures? The drum offers no final answer, only a deeper question. It reminds us that we are, at our core, rhythmic creatures yearning for harmony, not just in sound, but in being. We seek to step out of our solitary skins and into a larger body, if only for a moment. We long to feel our own heartbeat confirm that it is not alone, that it is part of a vast, pulsing network of other hearts, all beating to the same, ancient, inaudible time. But in that moment of unity, as the boundary between self and other blurs, what do we become? And what, or who, are we willing to follow into the beat? This same blurring of boundaries, this same surrender to a collective emotion, manifests in another, more silent, universal language. If the drum is the sound of the collective body, then what is the meaning of the tears that fall during our most sacred rites? Why is it that at the peak of joy, a wedding, and the depth of sorrow, a funeral, the human response is often the same? A welling of salt water, a quiet crack in the voice, a shared vulnerability. What truth is spoken in this wordless act that words themselves could never hope to convey? At both ends of a human life, the wedding and the funeral, tears fall. In joy and in sorrow, the same salt water wells up from the same ducts, tracing identical paths down the same cheeks. Is this a biological ritual? A programmed response written into our very flesh, a single key on the emotional piano that plays two profoundly different songs? Perhaps tears are not a sign of a specific emotion, but a signal of an emotion so vast it has surpassed its own boundaries, spilling over into the physical world. The biological story of emotional tears is a tale unique to our species. While an animal may cry to lubricate an irritated eye, only the human animal weeps from a broken heart or an overflowing one. This is not a trivial distinction. Biochemically, emotional tears are different from reflexive ones. They contain a higher concentration of stress hormones like adrenocorticotropic hormone and leucine-enkephalin, a natural painkiller. It is as if the body, when flooded with a feeling too intense to process, be it grief or awe, has developed a literal pressure valve. We do not just feel the emotion, we excrete it, we cry it out. But this physiological release is only one side of the coin. The act of crying is also a powerful social signal, a nonverbal language written in water. When we see a tear-streaked face, our brains respond with a surge of empathy, a mirroring that compels us to connect, to comfort, to share the burden. In this way, a tear is both a private purge and a public plea. It is a paradox, a deeply personal experience that, by its very nature, invites the community to participate. So, when we stand at a wedding, watching two lives intertwine, our tears are not merely for the joy of the moment, but for the immense, terrifying vulnerability of such a promise. And at a funeral, they are not just for the loss, but for the collective acknowledgement of a love that now has nowhere to go. The tear, then, is a bridge between the internal landscape of the self and the external world of others. But how far back does this bridge stretch? When did we first learn to build it? The archaeological record offers no vials of ancient tears, but it provides something perhaps more poignant: the silent testimony of ritual. In graves dating back tens of thousands of years, we find evidence that goes beyond mere disposal of the dead. There are ochre stains, suggesting a symbolic covering of the body in the color of earth and blood. There are carefully placed shells and tools, gifts for a journey, and in some sites, the impressions of hands pressed into the wet clay surrounding a body, or the subtle patterns in the soil that hint at the gentle patting of earth onto a shrouded form. These are the fossilized remnants of care. We can almost hear the echoes of lament, the choked sobs, the whispered farewells. This was not a clinical act. It was a ceremony of separation, and at its heart was the tear. The act of mourning, of gathering to weep, appears to be as fundamental to being human as making tools or using fire. It was a way of saying, "This life mattered." The community came together not just to dispose of a body, but to process a void. The tears that fell into that fresh earth were the first words of a story we are still telling, the story of what it means to love, to lose, and to belong to something greater than ourselves. The wedding, though a celebration of a beginning, shares this same architectural core. It, too, is a ritual of transition, a moment where the individual is subsumed into a new social unit, and the old self, in a way, dies. Is the cry at the altar, then, also a kind of mourning? A farewell to a solitary existence, acknowledged with the same primal saltwater as a farewell to life itself? In our modern world, where emotion is often curated and privatized, the public tear retains its ancient power. Crying at a wedding or a funeral is not merely an involuntary reaction. It is a performative act, a social language that the community understands intuitively. At a funeral, the tear is a token of respect, a visible measure of the loss. It tells the bereaved family, "Your pain is seen. Your loved one was valued. We, too, feel the emptiness." It grants social permission for the enormity of the grief. To remain stoic and dry-eyed might be interpreted as indifference, a failure to grasp the significance of the event. Conversely, at a wedding, the tear is a testament to the weight of the commitment. It says, "I understand the magnitude of this vow. I am a witness to this profound change." It is a shared recognition of the beautiful, frightening leap of faith two people are taking. In both cases, the tear binds the individual to the collective. It transforms a personal emotion into a communal experience, reinforcing the social fabric at the very moments it is most vulnerable to being torn by death or by the reconfiguration of relationships. But is this social script an unalloyed good? Is there a virtue in resisting the tide? A compelling counter-argument whispers from the corners of stoicism and self-control. What good are tears, really? Do they change the outcome? A tear cannot bring the dead back to life, nor can it guarantee a marriage's success. Would it not be stronger, more resilient, to suppress the show of emotion, to stand firm in the face of loss, to meet joy with steady, dry-eyed confidence? This philosophy champions the inner fortress, the mind that masters the body's tempests. There is a certain dignity in this, an appeal to the power of the human will over what can feel like biological helplessness. After all, a society built on unchecked emotionalism might be a fragile one. Yet, this argument may misunderstand the fundamental purpose of the tear. The tear is not a tool for altering external reality. It is an instrument for navigating internal truth. To refuse to cry is to refuse to acknowledge the full impact of an event. It is to build a dam against a river that will, inevitably, find another way to flood its banks. The strength may not lie in the suppression, but in the surrender, the courage to be visibly, vulnerably human. The Stoic's silence is powerful, but is the mourner's sob, or the parent of the bride's quiet weep, any less so? It is a different kind of strength, one of connection rather than isolation. Perhaps the real question is not whether we should cry, but what we lose when we choose not to. So, the tear that falls at the grave and the tear that falls at the altar are not opposites, but siblings. They are the body's ancient, wordless poem for moments of irreversible transition. They are the biological and social acknowledgement that something of great significance is happening, an ending that contains a beginning, or a beginning that requires an ending. They are a signal that we are feeling, deeply and overwhelmingly, and that we need our tribe to see it. This raw, honest signal of feeling may be the very bedrock upon which we built our first attempts to explain the world. For when the feeling becomes too vast to be contained by the body alone, when the tear is not enough, we must give it a story. And is this not where gods are born? From the need to tell a story about why the tears must fall at all? Before there were myths, there were storms. There was the sudden, gut-tearing crack of thunder that shook the very ground, the blinding fork of lightning that set the world ablaze. There was the silent, inexplicable death that took a child in the night, leaving only a cold, small body and a void of understanding. Before gods, there was only the event, raw and terrifying, and the fear that followed. It was a fear without a name, a pressure in the chest with nowhere to go. Then, perhaps huddled around a flickering fire, a voice, trembling not just from the cold, broke the silence. It did not say, "We do not know." It said, "He is angry." This was the first draft of divinity, not written in ink, but etched into the human psyche with the sharp tool of dread. The birth of the gods was not an act of pure imagination, but a profound biological rationalization of fear. It was the mind's desperate attempt to trade the chaos of the random for the terrifying, yet structured order of a personality. An unpredictable storm is a force of nature. An angry god is a being one can, in theory, appease. The former is a sentence of helplessness. The latter, however frightening, is the beginning of a conversation. This instinct to see a face in the storm is deeply woven into our genetic fabric. We are the descendants of those who erred on the side of caution. Imagine our ancient ancestor on the savannah, hearing a rustle in the grass. Was it just the wind, or a stalking predator? The individual who assumed agency, who believed the rustle had a will, a purpose, and fled, lived to pass on their genes. The one who dismissed it as the wind might have become a meal. This is the foundation of what cognitive scientists call agency detection bias. Our innate, often subconscious tendency to attribute ambiguous events to the intentional action of a conscious being. It is a cognitive shortcut that served us well for survival. The world, in its terrifying complexity, is far easier to navigate if it is populated by minds like our own, even vastly more powerful ones, than by blind, indifferent physics. We are hardwired for narrative, for character, for motive. When the earth trembles, it is not just shifting tectonic plates, it is the footstep of a giant. When plague descends, it is not a mindless pathogen, it is the punishment of a scorned deity. Our brains, magnificent pattern recognition machines, would rather see a pattern of intention, even a malevolent one, than accept the chilling quiet of chance. The archaeological record offers a silent, stone-carved testimony to this process. The earliest representations of the divine are rarely benevolent pastoral figures. They emerge from the cataclysmic and the uncontrollable. In the charred remains of ancient settlements near volcanoes, we find effigies of fire gods. In cultures dependent on unpredictable rivers, we find deities of flood and drought. The gods of thunder, of the sea, of the hunt. They are personifications of the immense powers that held the power of life and death over humanity. These were not philosophical abstractions. They were explanations for the forces that could, without warning, erase a season's food or an entire village. To name these forces, to give them a shape and a story, was the first step toward building a relationship with them. It was a way to impose a fragile sense of control onto a world that offered none. One could now make an offering, perform a ritual, sing a hymn of praise. The volcano might still erupt, but at least you had tried to reason with it. You had not simply waited, passive and dumb, for the end. And this ancient circuitry still hums within us, even in our age of reason and silicon. The gods of Olympus and Valhalla may have receded, but the human need for a story to explain the inexplicable has not diminished. It has simply found new vessels. When a global pandemic sweeps the world, science gives us the virus's genome, its transmission vectors, its epidemiological models. Yet, alongside this data, powerful narratives bloom. Stories of deliberate creation, of hidden agendas, of shadowy cabals. These are modern mythologies, born from the same deep-seated need to attribute a chaotic, frightening event to a deliberate agency. It is less terrifying to believe in a malicious plan than to accept that a microscopic piece of RNA could bring our civilization to its knees through mere accident. We still seek the face in the storm. It is just that the face now wears a suit or appears on a computer screen. Our personal beliefs, too, often follow this pattern. We speak of the universe conspiring to help us, or of fate intervening. We personify the abstract because a universe with a personality, however inscrutable, feels less lonely than a cold, empty cosmos. But if this is all just a trick of the mind, a useful fiction born from a survival bias, why does it persist so stubbornly in the blinding light of science? We have mapped the genome. We understand plate tectonics. We can predict eclipses to the second. We have demystified the rainbow and the lightning bolt. Logic and evidence should have rendered these ancient crutches obsolete, consigning them to the museum of quaint human errors. Why do the stories still hold such power? Perhaps the answer lies in the limitations of logic itself. Knowledge can tell us how the heart beats, but it cannot mend one broken by grief. It can describe the chemical processes of death, but it cannot answer the silence that follows a final breath. Science offers magnificent descriptions, but it is often silent on the subject of meaning. It gives us the blueprint of the house, but not a reason to live in it. The stories we tell, the gods we create, the myths we weave, are not just attempts to explain the mechanics of the world. They are tools for survival in the face of the unbearable. They are the narratives that allow a community to mourn together, to find purpose in suffering, to face the abyss without being swallowed by it. A scientific paper on mortality rates is factually true, but it is a cold companion in the dark of night. A story of an afterlife, of a spirit world, of a memory living on in the hearts of others. This is a warmth, however illusory, that can keep the chill of despair at bay. The rationalization of fear, then, is not merely a cognitive error to be corrected. It is a fundamental human art, the art of making the intolerable meaningful, The stories we crafted to explain the thunder were not just about the noise in the sky. They were about our place in a vast, frightening universe. They were the first lines of an epic poem humanity has been writing about itself for millennia. And this poem was not written on parchment or stone tablets alone. It was inscribed onto something far more durable and intimate, the collective body of the tribe, the city, the culture. The story of the angry god was not a conclusion to be filed away. It was a living script, a catalyst for action. It demanded a response, a ritual, a shared performance. It forced people to come together, to chant, to dance, to offer a sacrifice. In doing so, the abstract fear was transformed into a tangible, communal experience. The myth gave birth to the ritual, and the ritual, in turn, carved the myth into the very muscle and bone of the community. For if the birth of the gods was the rationalization of fear, then what was the next essential step in making that story real? How does a tale told around a fire become the unshakable truth of a people, passed down through generations long before the invention of writing? The story had to be moved from the realm of idea into the realm of action. It had to be lived, not just believed. It had to be felt in the pounding of drums, seen in the flickering firelight on painted faces, and remembered in the exhaustion and ecstasy of a communal dance that lasted until dawn. The narrative needed a body. And so, the community became that body. The memory of why the god was angry, and what must be done to appease him, could not be entrusted to something as fragile as papyrus or as exclusive as the written word. It had to be etched into something more permanent. It had to be etched into us. But how does a memory become flesh? Before there was writing, there was the elder standing in the firelight, his voice a low rumble against the crackling logs. He did not tell of hunts, of ancestors, of taboos, so that they might be written down. He told them so that they would be remembered in the marrow of the listeners, in the rhythm of their own heartbeats. No one wrote a single word, yet everyone remembered. The story became a shared possession, a collective memory etched not on parchment, but into the very fabric of the tribe. This was the original library, and its architecture was not stone and shelf, but movement, emotion, and the hypnotic dance of flames. It suggests a profound, almost forgotten truth, that collective memory begins not with the written word, but with ritual. The human brain, this intricate organ of memory, seems to have been wired for this very purpose from the beginning. Modern neuroscience reveals that information is not stored in a single neat file. It is woven into a complex tapestry of neural pathways, and the threads that make this tapestry strongest are not cold facts, but sensory-rich experiences. When a piece of knowledge is accompanied by movement, the rhythmic stomping of feet in a dance, by emotion, the shared fear of a predator's tail or the collective joy of a successful harvest, and by rhythm, the cadence of a chant, the beat of a drum, it bypasses the short-term buffers and carves a deep, enduring groove into our consciousness. The dry recitation of a rule is easily forgotten, the rule enacted in a ritual of initiation, where the candidate feels the weight of expectation, the sting of a symbolic test, and the warmth of communal acceptance, becomes a part of their identity. The ritual, then, is not mere decoration for the message. It is the very mechanism of encoding. It leverages the biological quirks of our hippocampus and amygdala, turning abstract lessons into visceral, unforgettable truths. Could it be that our capacity for culture was unlocked not by our ability to think, but by our body's innate talent for remembering what it feels? Long before the first city was built, our ancestors were building cathedrals of memory in the open air. Archaeological sites across the world offer silent testimony to this ancient practice. In the deep, echoing chambers of caves like Lascaux or Chauvet, we find not just art, but perhaps the setting for profound rituals. Imagine the flickering torchlight animating the magnificent breathing forms of painted bison and horses on the rough stone walls. The act of gathering in such a sacred, dangerous space, the smell of damp earth and smoke, the chants resonating in the darkness. This was a multisensory classroom. Here, the knowledge of animal behavior, migratory routes, and hunting strategies was passed down, not from a textbook, but through an immersive experience. Similarly, the rhythmic grinding of grain, transformed into a harvest dance, taught the cycles of the seasons and the importance of communal labor. A coming-of-age ceremony, often involving isolation, physical trials, and symbolic death and rebirth, was the ultimate way to sear the responsibilities of adulthood into the young psyche. These traditions were the vessels that carried the entire operating manual of a society, its laws, its ethics, its survival skills, across countless generations, all without a single written character. What does it mean that the most enduring knowledge of our species was transmitted not through statements, but through performances? Even in our hyper-literate, technologically saturated world, this ancient programming still runs deep. Consider what we truly remember, what shapes us at our core. We may have read about love and commitment in books, but the memory that anchors that concept is the ritual of a wedding. The walking down the aisle, the exchange of vows before a community, the weight of the ring. We studied for years to earn a degree, but the moment of transition is crystallized in the ritual of graduation. The wearing of the cap and gown, the walking across the stage, the handshake. The life of a loved one is summarized in obituaries, but their essence is honored in the rituals of a funeral or an anniversary of their passing, where shared stories and prescribed acts of remembrance bring a community together to grieve and to heal. The information is available everywhere, instantly, but it is the ritual that makes it real, that transforms data into meaning and individual experience into collective memory. Our most cherished truths are not downloaded. They are danced, sung, and solemnly enacted. Have we, in our quest for efficiency, mistaken the map for the territory, the menu for the meal? A counter-argument naturally arises from our modern sensibility. Is the written word, with its precision and permanence, not a far superior vessel? Now that we have the formidable power of technology to record and disseminate information instantly, are these ancient rituals not merely sentimental relics, charming but ultimately inefficient? Writing is indeed a revolutionary technology, allowing knowledge to escape the fragile confines of human memory and travel across space and time. It enables critique, complex argument, and a level of abstraction impossible in an oral culture, but to see it as a simple replacement is to misunderstand the function of ritual. Writing captures the what. Ritual embodies the why. A legal code written in a book can dictate punishment for a crime, but a ritual that enacts the restoration of harmony between the victim, the perpetrator, and the community addresses the deeper emotional wound that the crime created. One deals with the letter of the law, the other with the spirit of the people. Ritual provides the emotional and social context that gives the written rule its force. Without the lived, felt experience of belonging and shared values that rituals foster, can written words alone maintain the cohesion of a society? Or do they risk becoming hollow pronouncements, ignored when the pressure becomes too great? So, if ritual is the primordial ground from which shared understanding grows, then writing, for all its power, might be seen as a later, more specialized tool. It is the photograph of the living event. The photograph can be analyzed, copied, and spread far and wide, but it lacks the warmth, the movement, the shared breath of the moment itself. The written word can describe a ritual in exquisite detail, but it cannot replicate the transformative experience of participating in it. This leads us to a tentative observation, that the first artists were not those who sought to create beauty for its own sake, but those who mastered the art of survival through symbolic action. The storyteller by the fire, the painter in the cave, the choreographer of the harvest dance, they were the most vital technologists of their time. Their medium was not ink or pigment, but human attention and emotion. Their canvas was the collective mind of the tribe. They were crafting the narratives that would bind people together, that would ensure the hard-won knowledge of one generation became the instinct of the next. This reframes the very origin of art, moving it from the realm of leisure to the realm of necessity. The person who could tell the most compelling story about the hunt, who could paint the most evocative image of the prey, who could choreograph the most accurate simulation of the encounter, was not merely an entertainer. They were a strategist, a teacher, a leader. Their artistry directly increased the odds of survival for the entire group. A well-told story was a training manual. A vivid cave painting was a tactical map. A powerful ritual was a rehearsal for reality. In this light, the impulse to create was inseparable from the impulse to endure. The first mark made on a wall was not a declaration of "I am," but a plea, a prayer, a plan for "we will be." So, if the keeper of the first rituals was the original artist, then we must ask, was their greatest masterpiece not the story they told, but the community they helped to build? And if artistry is so deeply tied to our survival, what does that say about a world that often treats it as a luxury? The flickering torchlight dances across the cold, damp stone, illuminating a shape. It is not a shape of beauty, not in the way we understand it today. There are no graceful lines, no perfect proportions. It is a crude, urgent scrawl, a mammoth or a bison, its form distorted by the curve of the rock. A spear pierces its side, suggested by a single, forceful line. Around it, stick-figure humans swarm, their bodies angled in a chaotic running dance. This is not a gallery piece. It is a heartbeat, frozen in ochre and charcoal. It is a breath held for 20,000 years. The first artist was not trying to create something beautiful. They were trying to survive. To stand before these ancient markings in Lascaux or Chauvet is to feel a profound dislocation from our modern definitions of art. We search for aesthetic pleasure and find instead a raw, visceral report from the edge of existence. The image is not a depiction of a world. It is an extension of it. The act of drawing the spear striking home was, in some deep neurological sense, a rehearsal for the event itself. The human brain, a magnificent pattern recognition engine, learns more efficiently through images than through abstract words. Long before language could articulate complex strategies, the visual cortex was already a sophisticated simulation machine. To see the hunt unfold on the wall was to run the program in a safe space, to map the terrain of fear and action, to prepare the body's responses before stepping into the genuine life-or-death chaos of the plain. The painting was a cognitive tool, a mental whetstone on which survival skills were sharpened. Archaeology whispers this truth to us. The oldest known narratives are not love poems or philosophical treatises. They are technical manuals painted in blood and earth. The placement of the animals, the angles of the spears, the repetition of certain scenes, these are not arbitrary. They are records of successful tactics, a communal hard drive storing vital data. A single hunt required the coordinated effort of many, and the knowledge gained from it was too precious to be entrusted solely to the fragile vessel of oral tradition. A story told around a fire could shift with each telling, but the painting on the wall remained, a constant reference point. It was a visual database for passing critical knowledge from one generation to the next. The artist shaman was not a frivolous decorator, but a chief information officer, encoding the tribe's most valuable asset, collective experience, into the very landscape of their world. In the flickering light, the young would watch as the elders traced the lines, not just describing the hunt, but reliving it, their muscles remembering the movements the images provoked. This instinct did not vanish with the last ice age, it simply evolved its medium. We no longer paint bison on cave walls, but we are still that same species, desperate to simulate reality before we face it. The storyboard for a multi-million-dollar action film, with its arrows indicating camera movement and character action, is a direct descendant of the hunting sequence in the cave. It is a pre-visualization of a complex, coordinated event. The military uses flight simulators and virtual reality combat drills for the same reason our ancestors used pigments, to build muscle memory and strategic intuition in a consequence-free environment. A corporate infographic that simplifies a dense market analysis into a flowing chart is attempting to do what the first artists did: make complex, survival-critical information immediately comprehensible to the group. Every time we watch a tutorial video to fix a leaky faucet or learn a new skill, we are participating in this ancient ritual. We are using visual narrative as a scaffold for action, a way to navigate an uncertain world. But then, a quiet counter-argument arises from the shadows of the cave. If the purpose was purely practical, if the goal was merely the efficient transmission of information, why this undeniable power? Why the awe we feel? Why the sheer, inexplicable effort? Oral instruction would have sufficed for the bare mechanics. A spoken command, aim for the shoulder, is faster to deliver than a painted tableau. The necessity of the image itself seems excessive. Was it? Perhaps the answer lies in the space between what can be said and what must be felt. Language is a magnificent tool for the tangible, for the what and the how. But it stumbles, and often fails, when faced with the intangible. The gut-churning terror of the charging beast, the adrenal rush of the chase, the sacred weight of taking a life to sustain your own. These are experiences that reside in the body and the limbic system, far below the neocortex where words are formed. How do you convey the precise angle of a spear thrust, not just as a geometric fact, but as a full-bodied commitment? How do you teach courage? You cannot speak it into existence. You must embody it. The painting, then, was more than a diagram. It was a focal point for the embodiment of experience. To gather before it was not just to learn, but to be emotionally and psychologically inoculated. The act of creating the image, the physicality of grinding the pigment, the sweeping arm motions required to outline the great beast, was itself a ritual of preparation. It compressed the impending chaos into a manageable form, a symbolic victory that bolstered the spirit for the real fight. The image held what words could not, the emotional data of survival. And so the first artist dipped a finger into the crushed earth and traced the outline of their world, not to decorate it, but to converse with it, to influence it, to plead with its mysteries. The painting was a bridge between the inner world of fear and hope and the outer world of tooth and claw. It was a technology of the spirit as much as a technology of the hunt. In that simple, powerful line describing a spear's flight, we see the birth of a uniquely human faith. The belief that by representing the world, we can, in some small way, alter our place within it. The image was a cradle for courage, a weapon against the unknown. If the first stories were not told but painted, if they were born from necessity rather than leisure, then what does that say about the stories we tell today? Are they too, in their own way, a subtle and sophisticated form of survival? And if the crude drawing of a hunt was a way to grasp the ungraspable, to give form to the sacred terror of existence, then what is the next logical step for a species that has mastered the image? How do we move from depicting the hunt to capturing the very essence of the hunt's meaning? How do we compress not just an action, but an entire cosmology into a single potent gesture? The rhythm begins, not with a sound, but with a collective intake of breath. Under a sky heavy with stars, a circle of figures moves, their feet tracing patterns in the dust that their ancestors knew by heart. It is the night of the full moon. No one needs to be told why they are here. The reason is older than language, a pull as undeniable as the tide. In another time, on a different continent, smoke curls from an altar as the season turns. The offering is made, not out of fear, perhaps, but out of a deep, cellular need to mark the moment, to say, this matters. This is a ritual. It is the human act of taking the vast, flowing river of time and emotion and attempting to pour it into a single, contained vessel. A dance, a chant, a shared silence. We are creatures of pattern, seeking order in chaos. Deep within the brain, in the ancient structures that we share with lizards and birds, lies a craving for predictability. When a specific sequence of actions is performed, the lighting of a candle, the folding of hands, the precise steps of a ceremonial dance, It activates neural pathways associated with ritualistic behavior. This is not mere superstition. It is a biological hack. In a world of unpredictable harvests, sudden storms, and inevitable loss, the ritual offers a tiny island of certainty. The outcome of the hunt is unknown, but the prayer before the hunt is always the same. The grief of a death is a maelstrom, but the funeral rites provide a map through the sorrow. By performing the ritual, we are not attempting to control the universe, but rather, we are imposing a momentary control over our own internal chaos. The brain, in its brilliant simplicity, rewards this predictability with a quieting of the amygdala, the seat of anxiety, and a release of neurotransmitters that whisper a primal reassurance. You have done this before. You know what comes next. In the face of the infinite unknown, the ritual is a small, defiant act of naming. It is a way of saying that this sliver of time, this particular emotion, will not simply dissolve into the blur of days. It will be framed, held, and given a shape. Long before we wrote our histories, we performed them. In the cool darkness of a Paleolithic cave, far from the entrance, handprints were stenciled onto rock walls. This was not casual graffiti. It was an act that required pigment, breath, and intention, a ritual of identity, a way of saying, I was here. Archaeologists sifting through the remains of ancient settlements find more than just tools and bones. They find patterns, hearths arranged in a specific orientation, bodies buried in a fetal position facing the east, shells and ochre placed with care. These are the fossils of emotion. A ritual from this vantage point is a profound technology of memory compression. An entire agricultural cycle, the anxiety of planting, the hope of rain, the joy of harvest, the gratitude for the sun, could be encapsulated in a single week-long festival. The complex, often terrifying knowledge of birth, death, and the cycles of the moon could be transmitted not through a tedious lecture, but through a powerful, participatory drama. The ritual becomes a living library, a container for cultural knowledge too nuanced and too vital to be trusted solely to words. It packages a whole philosophy of life into a series of gestures, making the abstract tangible and the communal bond unbreakable. The tribe does not just believe the same things, it does the same things. And in the doing, the belief is woven into the very muscle and bone. This ancient technology is not lost on us, the moderns who believe ourselves free of such primitive needs. We have simply given our rituals new names and new costumes. The athlete, before the big game, goes through a precise sequence of stretches and taps, a private liturgy to ward off chance. The soldier, standing at attention as the flag is raised, feels a complex mix of duty, sacrifice, and belonging compressed into that moment of salute. A couple exchanging rings is not merely engaging in a legal contract. They are performing a ritual that attempts to contain a lifetime of love, promise, and vulnerability into a circle of metal. Even our most secular routines, the morning coffee made just so, the specific route taken on a walk, are micro-rituals that anchor us in the self. They are emotional shorthand, a way of bypassing the need for lengthy explanation. The feeling is the ritual, and the ritual is the feeling. We need not articulate the profound sense of peace that a few minutes of meditation brings. The act itself is the articulation. In a world saturated with information, the ritual remains a potent form of communication that operates below the level of conscious thought, a symbolic compression of meaning that requires no footnotes. And yet, a skeptic's voice whispers from the corner of our busy minds, is any of this real? Or are we, like birds performing elaborate mating dances we do not understand, simply going through the motions? Is the handshake at the closing of a business deal anything more than an empty formality? Is the repetition of a prayer just a hollow echo in a silent universe? This is the perennial challenge to ritual, the accusation that it is mere form, devoid of authentic substance. The danger is real. Any ritual, repeated often enough, can lose its emotional charge and degenerate into rote performance. The words of the pledge become a mumbled mantra. the family dinner a distracted affair lit by the glow of separate screens. The form can become a cage, trapping us in behaviors whose original meaning has long since evaporated, leaving only the brittle shell of obligation. In its worst manifestations, ritual can be weaponized to enforce conformity, to stifle questioning, to make the unacceptable seem sacred simply because it is ancient. Is the comfort it provides then just an illusion, a self-administered placebo? Perhaps the answer lies not in choosing between substance and form, but in recognizing that the deepest substances often require a form to become visible. A song is more than the sum of its notes, yet it cannot exist without them. The ritual is the vessel. It is the cup that holds the wine. Without the cup, the wine spills and is lost to the earth. The form is not the enemy of authenticity. It is its potential home. The repetitive motion, the familiar words, the shared space. These are the scaffolds upon which we can build moments of genuine connection and understanding. They create a container sturdy enough to hold our most volatile emotions, our grief, our joy, our terror, without allowing them to destroy us. The value may not reside in the repetition itself, but in what the repetition makes space for. It clears a psychic landing strip, allowing a moment of transcendence to touch down in our ordinary lives. So we are left with a paradox, cradled in the palm of a timeless human gesture. We perform these acts, knowing they are constructs, yet feeling their power nonetheless. They are, in a sense, a beautiful collective agreement to believe in the moment we are creating. They are the loops of thread that bind the scattered beads of our experience into a necklace we can recognize as a life, a culture, a shared history. They allow us to touch the eternal, not by escaping time, but by folding it into a shape we can hold. If we were to strip them all away, in the name of pure efficiency or unvarnished reality, what would remain? We would still eat, sleep, and procreate. We would still be biological organisms, successful in our survival. But would the meal shared without a blessing taste the same? Would the loss of a loved one be mourned or merely registered? The ritual is the punctuation in the run-on sentence of existence. It is the ceremony that transforms a biological event into a human one. It is the act that allows us to feel our belonging to something larger than ourselves. Without these deliberate pauses, these patterned investments of meaning, does life not risk becoming a flat, featureless plane where one day bleeds indistinguishably into the next? We would live, certainly. But is that kind of existence, devoid of the sacred frames we build around the mundane, truly a human one? Or does it merely prepare the ground for a different kind of hunger, a longing for the very meaning we have abandoned? And if these rituals of action are what compress our experience into meaning, what then of the rituals of expression that give that meaning a voice? If we ceased to build these ceremonial containers for our time and our emotions, would we not then need another, even more fundamental way to say, "This mattered"? In the dust and despair of a refugee camp, a figure sits, not waiting for bread or water, but for a different kind of sustenance. Their hands are busy with a piece of scavenged charcoal, tracing lines on a torn piece of cardboard. No one is paying them. No one commissioned this work. Yet they draw. They draw the home that is now rubble, the dog that did not survive the journey, the dream of a future that persists like a stubborn weed through cracked concrete. This act, seemingly superfluous in the face of survival, might be the most human thing they do. It raises a quiet, persistent question. Stripped of everything, what remains that makes us who we are? The answer, perhaps, is not in what we cling to for life, but in what we create from it. We often think of art as a luxury, the decorative frosting on the solid cake of civilization, something to be enjoyed once the basic needs of food, shelter, and security are met. But what if this understanding is backwards? What if the impulse to create is not a refinement of being human, but its very foundation? Biology offers a clue, not in the cold language of data, but in the warm electric circuitry of our own minds. When a person engages in an act of creation, sketching a memory, humming a forgotten tune, shaping clay into a crude form. They are not merely passing time. They are performing a kind of neurological alchemy. The brain's reward centers, those ancient regions concerned with pleasure and motivation, light up. But so do the deep wells of the limbic system, the seat of emotion and memory. Most significantly, the prefrontal cortex, the cradle of our sense of self and meaning, hums with activity. This neural symphony suggests that creating art is a fundamental process of integration. In a hostile environment, where the present moment is a relentless assault of deprivation and fear, the self can begin to fracture. Memory becomes a painful burden, and the future a terrifying void. The act of creation fights this disintegration by externalizing an inner image, a lost home, a remembered face. The individual is not just depicting something. They are rebuilding their own identity, piece by piece on the outside. They are drawing a boundary around their psyche, declaring, "I am more than this suffering. I am the one who remembers, the one who feels, the one who imagines." The artwork, however simple, becomes a testament to a persistent consciousness. It is a biological bulwark against the tide of trauma, a way for the brain to insist on its own coherence when the world insists on chaos. So, is the drive to create art woven into our very DNA, not as a frivolous gene, but as an essential tool for psychological survival? This is not a new strategy invented in modern clinics or refugee camps. The evidence is etched in stone and bone, buried in the layers of our deepest past. Archaeologists have unearthed settlements from the Paleolithic era, places abandoned in haste due to sudden climate shifts or dwindling resources. In these spaces, where the struggle for existence must have been absolute, we find something astonishing. Alongside the practical debris of stone tools and animal bones, there are the non-utilitarian objects. A piece of ochre carved with a geometric pattern, a small, voluptuous figurine of a woman, smoothed by countless hands, handprints stenciled on a cave wall, a signature that says, "I was here." These artifacts were not necessary for hunting or gathering. They consumed precious time and energy. Yet, they were made. Imagine a small band of early humans, their future uncertain, their stomachs perhaps not full. One of them spends hours carving a figure from a mammoth tusk. What compulsion drives this? It seems to be an effort to impose order on chaos, to find a pattern in the randomness of existence. The art object becomes a focal point for shared meaning, a tangible anchor for stories, fears, and hopes. It is an attempt to communicate something that cannot be said with words alone: awe, vulnerability, the mystery of birth and death. In creating these things, our ancestors were not just decorating their world, they were defining it, and in doing so, defining themselves. They were drawing a line between merely existing and living with purpose. Could these ancient artifacts be the first evidence of a collective soul, a whispered agreement that to be human is to seek meaning beyond the material? This thread of meaning-making continues unbroken into our modern world, manifesting most powerfully where humanity is under the greatest pressure. In the stark confines of a prison cell, a man composes poetry on scraps of paper. In a children's hospital ward, small hands mold bright colors into fantastical creatures. In the limbo of a refugee camp, songs are sung in hushed tones, preserving a culture that has no land left to stand on. In these contexts, art sheds any pretense of being a mere hobby or entertainment. It transforms into a quiet, profound act of resistance. It is resistance not against a political regime, per se, but against the ultimate tyranny, the erasure of the self by suffering. When a person is reduced to a number, a case file, a statistic, the act of creation is a rebellion. It is a reclamation of agency. I may not control my incarceration, my illness, or my displacement, but I control this line, this note, this shape. I choose to bring something new into the world that did not exist before. This is the opposite of being assimilated by pain. It is the assertion that the inner world, the world of memory, emotion, and imagination, remains a sovereign territory. The artwork becomes a flag planted on that territory, a declaration that the human spirit cannot be fully subdued by external circumstances. It is a way of saying, you can confine my body, but you cannot confine my mind. So, is art, in its purest form, the ultimate expression of human freedom? And yet, a counter-argument whispers from the corners of pure pragmatism. If this impulse is so vital, why does it offer no clear, measurable advantage? A well-crafted spear ensures a meal, a sturdy shelter provides safety. But a song does not fill the belly, and a drawing does not keep the rain out. In the ruthless arithmetic of survival, art is a deficit. It consumes energy without providing a tangible return. So why does it persist? Why does this seemingly inefficient, wasteful behavior haunt our species from the caves to the camps? The persistence of art in the face of its own impracticality suggests that its value operates on a different plane altogether. It is not about survival of the body, but survival of the self. Living, breathing, eating, reproducing is the necessary condition. But being human is the sufficient condition. Art is the tool we use to bridge that gap. It is the mechanism by which we transform biological existence into a life of meaning. It is how we process the unbearable, commemorate the lost, and imagine the possible. It is the language we use to speak to ourselves about who we are and to others about what we share. Without it, we would still live. We would function. But would we be fully aware of our own existence? Would we have a story to tell? This brings us to a final tantalizing observation, a single slice of a much deeper mystery. If art is indeed this fundamental, then we should find its fingerprints on the very origins of human society. And we do, in a way that challenges our hierarchy of what is important. Every known civilization, without exception, has created musical instruments. But not every civilization developed a system of writing. The oldest flutes, carved from bird bone and mammoth ivory, predate the earliest cuneiform tablets by tens of thousands of years. This is not a minor detail. It is a profound clue. It suggests that before we learned to record contracts, laws, or histories, we were gathering to share rhythm and melody. Before we could write down "I am," we were singing it together. Music, and the rituals it accompanied, may have been the primordial glue that bound small bands of humans into larger, cohesive communities. It allowed for the synchronization of emotion, the creation of collective effervescence, a shared experience that transcended the individual. The written word is a technology of complexity and empire, but the song is the technology of the soul. It is older, more universal, and in many ways, more essential. So, if the instrument came before the alphabet, does this mean that our first true language was not of words, but of sound and feeling? And if that is the case, what forgotten melodies still echo in the deepest chambers of the human heart, reminding us of what we are? In the dust of a forgotten settlement, the last brittle page of a manuscript has long since crumbled into illegible carbon. The laws, the names of kings, the precise records of harvests, all have vanished into the whisper of the wind. But nestled in the same earth, cradled in the grip of a skeleton, a flute carved from the wing bone of a vulture remains. Its holes, worn smooth by fingers we will never know, still wait for a breath. We cannot read their words, but we can hear their music. This silent instrument speaks a universal truth. Every civilization, without exception, leaves behind the evidence of song, of rhythm, of melody. Yet not all leave behind the marks we call writing. What does this asymmetry, this deep and ancient precedence of music over text, tell us about the very architecture of the human soul? The answer may begin not in the concert hall or the library, but in the dark, humming theater of the brain itself. Long before the intricate neural circuitry required for processing abstract symbols like letters was refined by evolution, the foundations for music were already laid down in our most primitive regions. The brainstem, the ancient reptilian core, governs our most basic rhythms, the steady percussion of the heart, the inhale and exhale of the lungs. It is here that a sudden loud sound triggers an instinctual jolt of fear. Wrapped around this core is the limbic system, the seat of emotion, a landscape that responds to music directly, bypassing the need for translation or explanation. A minor chord can evoke a pang of sadness before we have the word for it. A driving, complex rhythm can incite a surge of energy without a single command. Language, in its written form, is a latecomer, a sophisticated tenant in the neocortex, the brain's newest wing. It requires years of arduous training to master its codes. But music? It taps into a network that was already old when the first human drew a symbol on a cave wall. Is our love of melody, then, not a cultural invention, but a biological inheritance, a ghost in the neural machine humming a tune that predates humanity itself? This biological predisposition is echoed by the earth itself, which acts as a vast, patient archivist. The oldest known musical instruments, flutes carved from bird bone and mammoth ivory discovered in caves in southern Germany, are dated to over 40,000 years ago. They are contemporary with the most stunning cave paintings, suggesting that the creation of visual art and the creation of music were twin births of human symbolic thought. But the instruments are arguably more profound. A painting is fixed to a wall. A flute is portable, social, alive with the breath of its player. It implies a performance, a gathering, a shared experience in the flickering firelight. Across the globe and across millennia, the pattern holds. In the Neolithic villages of China, oracle bones would come much later, but ancient bone flutes with 7 precise holes, capable of producing a sophisticated scale, testify to a refined musical tradition. The majestic Dong Son drums of Vietnam, their surfaces etched with intricate scenes of life, were not merely instruments, but the beating hearts of their culture, used in ceremony and communication, their sound carrying across water and time. These objects were not luxuries. They were fundamental. They were among the first complex technologies, transforming raw materials into vessels for vibration, for community, for spirit. Why is it that when a culture begins to leave its mark upon the world, the mark is so often a sound? In our modern, hyper-literate world, this ancient power has not diminished. It has merely been amplified and commercialized, yet its core mechanics remain unchanged. A catchy pop melody can circumnavigate the globe in hours, leaping language barriers with an effortless grace that a political treatise or a legal document could never hope to emulate. We see it in the universal phenomenon of the earworm, a tune that lodges itself in the mind, repeating its pattern with a stubborn autonomy that feels almost separate from our conscious will. We see it in the way music bonds people, from the synchronized chants of a sports stadium to the intimate sharing of a playlist between friends. It forges an immediate, pre-verbal connection. A stranger who loves the same band is instantly less strange. Music organizes time. It coordinates movement. It regulates emotion. It is the social glue that holds groups together, a function as vital today in a crowded nightclub as it was 40,000 years ago in a dark cave. Could it be that music's primary evolutionary purpose was not individual expression, but collective cohesion, a technology for harmonizing the hearts and minds of the tribe, making them one? A skeptic might offer a simpler, more pragmatic explanation. Perhaps the prevalence of musical artifacts is just a matter of durability and purpose. A drum, a bell, a flute. These are objects made of stone, metal, or hardy bone. They are designed to be struck, blown, handled. A written document, by contrast, is fragile. Papyrus rots, parchment decays, clay tablets shatter. Furthermore, music is associated with joy, with ritual, with celebration, the parts of life we most want to enshrine. Writing, especially in its earliest forms, was often administrative, bureaucratic, a tool for taxation and control. Is it any wonder that what was made for the soul survives, while what was made for the ledger book often turns to dust? Is this asymmetry not merely a reflection of the different materials and intentions behind the objects, rather than a profound statement about human nature? But this practical view feels incomplete, like describing a symphony solely by listing its instruments. It misses the resonance, the meaning that vibrates in the space between the notes. The survival of music may point to something more essential, that music, ritual, and art are not decorative, additions to civilization, but its very root system. Writing is a magnificent branching out, a powerful tool for preserving and transmitting complex information across generations. It is the crown of the tree, but the deep, anchoring roots that draw sustenance from the dark soil of our shared biology are musical and rhythmic. They are the pulse of life itself. This is not to diminish writing, but to place it in a deeper context. It suggests that before we learn to document our world, we learn to sing to it, to dance for it, to resonate with it. And in this light, the most compelling evidence for music's primacy may not lie in ancient caves or brain scans, but in the crib of a newborn, an infant, days old, whose eyes are still learning to focus, will often still its frantic movements at the sound of a lullaby. It cannot understand the words, but it is calmed by the melody, the rhythm, the rising and falling contour of the mother's voice, a contour that mirrors the intonation of speech itself. This is not a learned behavior. It is a pre-wired response. Before the child can parse a single sentence, it can feel the emotional content of a song. Its tiny body sways to a beat before it can walk. In every babbling, cooing baby, is there not an echo of that first musician in the German cave, experimenting with sound, discovering that certain sequences of notes could soothe, could excite, could connect? In each child who sings before it speaks, are we hearing the faint, persistent echo of our deepest ancestors, reminding us that our first and most native language was not made of words, but of music? And if this is the case, what does it mean for a species that now communicates largely through silent text on bright screens, that the most fundamental rhythm of being still pulses just beneath the surface, waiting, always, for a song to bring it back to life? The infant, just months old, is a small storm of need. The cry begins as a whimper, a signal of distress, and escalates into a full-bodied plea that seems to consume the entire room. Then, the mother leans in. She does not speak complex words of comfort. Language is still a foreign country to this new arrival. Instead, she hums, a simple melodic line rising and falling like a gentle tide. The change is not instantaneous, but it is profound. The frantic cries subside into hiccuping breaths. The tiny body, rigid with tension, begins to soften. Wide, glistening eyes fixate on the source of the sound, and then something remarkable happens. A small, clumsy nod, a bounce, a primitive but unmistakable synchronization with the rhythm. Why? Before words, before walking, before the conscious understanding of a single symbol, why does the human organism respond to something as abstract as a melody? The answer may be written not in a songbook, but in the very architecture of our biology. From the moment the neural pathways begin to fire, the brain of a newborn appears pre-wired for musicality. It is a sensitivity rooted in the most fundamental rhythms of life itself. Within the womb, for 9 months, the dominant soundtrack is the steady, percussive lub-dub of the mother's heartbeat, a constant, reassuring meter. Studies monitoring infants just days old reveal that a slow, rhythmic piece of music can synchronize with their physiology, slowing a racing heart, regulating a shallow breath. The brainstem, the ancient core of our nervous system, processes rhythm before it processes language. It recognizes pattern, repetition, and predictability. A lullaby, then, is not an invention of culture, but a rediscovery of a biological truth. It is a return to that primal aqueous rhythm, a sonic replica of the safety that once was. The infant does not understand the music. The infant's body recognizes it. It is a form of remembering on a cellular level, a deep-seated knowledge that a steady beat signifies safety, and a chaotic one signals danger. Is our first connection to art then simply a matter of physiological calibration, a soothing of the animal within us? This biological predisposition finds an echo in the silent testimony of objects buried for millennia. Archaeology offers not melodies, but the ghosts of instruments. In caves and ancient burial sites, we find flutes carved from the bones of birds or mammoths, their holes positioned to produce a simple pentatonic scale. We find drums, little more than hollowed logs or skins stretched taut. These are not the instruments of grand concert halls. They are tools of intimacy. The sound of a bone flute is airy, soft, its range limited. The beat of an early drum is not a complex polyrhythm, but a steady, hypnotic pulse. It is not difficult to imagine these sounds in the context of a dark night, a restless child, a community seeking to soothe its most vulnerable. The rhythm of these ancient instruments mirrors the rhythm of a heartbeat, the cadence of a rocking cradle. They were, perhaps, humanity's first conscious attempt to externalize that internal, biological comfort, to create a shared sonic blanket against the vast and frightening silence of the world. Did these early musicians realize they were tapping into a deep neurological pathway? Or were they simply following an instinct as natural as a mother's hum, using the tools at their disposal to replicate the first sound they ever knew? This instinct transcends individual cultures, blooming spontaneously across the globe in one of the most universal forms of human expression, the lullaby. From the intricate melodies of a Bengali grihasti to the simple, repetitive verses of a Norwegian vugevize, the purpose remains identical. The lyrics are often nonsensical or dark, speaking of falling bridges or mythical creatures, but the musical structure is remarkably consistent, a slow tempo, a narrow melodic range, and smooth, legato phrases. What is truly captivating is that this art form arises instinctively. A mother who has never been taught to sing will, when holding her crying infant, naturally begin to vocalize in a higher pitch, with a slower rhythm and a more musical tone than her speaking voice. It is a behavioral universal, a piece of social software that seems to come pre-installed. The lullaby is a bridge built from sound, connecting two minds that do not yet share a language. It is a transaction of pure emotion, calm begetting calm. Does this universality suggest that music is not a luxury, but a fundamental tool of human connection, a vital technology for survival that predates even the wheel? A skeptic might interject here, offering a simpler, colder explanation. Perhaps the infant is not responding to music at all. Perhaps it is merely reacting to a novel auditory stimulus, a distraction from discomfort. The brain, after all, is wired to attend to new sounds as a matter of basic awareness. The calming effect could be nothing more than the cessation of crying due to this new focus, a neurological reset triggered by any sufficiently interesting noise. Is the baby truly moved by the melody? Or is it simply, temporarily, fascinated by a sound that is not its own distress? Are we, as adults, guilty of projecting our sophisticated understanding of art onto a primitive, reflexive response? Yet, this reductionist view feels incomplete, like describing a sunset as merely a specific wavelength of light. It explains the mechanism, but it misses the meaning. The fact that the specific stimuli of rhythm and melody are so universally effective, so deeply intertwined with our physiology and our social bonding, points to something more significant. If the calming power were merely about novelty, any sound would do. But it is the particular structure of music, its rhythm, its contour, that holds this profound power. This leads to a tentative, almost revolutionary observation. Perhaps art, in its most primal form, is not something we created from nothing. Perhaps it is a latent capacity, a pre-existing channel in the human mind, waiting to be activated. We did not invent music. We discovered that certain combinations of sound resonate with the deep structures of our consciousness. We stumbled upon a key that fits a lock we were born with. And what is that lock? It is the need to face the incomprehensible. The infant's first incomprehensible reality is the sheer overwhelm of existence outside the womb, a chaos of light, sound, and sensation. The lullaby is the first tool to manage that chaos. But this is only the beginning. As we grow, the chaos grows with us. We must confront storms that shake the heavens, diseases that strike without reason, and the ultimate, unanswerable mystery of death. If music is the instinctive tool for soothing the first small terror of being alive, what more complex instruments of meaning would we forge to confront the greater terrors of the world? The hum of a lullaby is a private magic, a spell against inner darkness. But what happens when the darkness is outside, towering and elemental, and the only sounds are the crash of thunder and the groan of the earth? If a simple melody can quiet a storm within a child, what grander story might be needed to quiet the storm outside? Before the weather map, our ancestors painted lightning as flying serpents. Before physics, they spoke of an angry god hurling stones of fire from the heavens. This was not a failure of intellect, but a triumph of a different kind of understanding. In the absence of data, the human mind does not surrender to the void. It builds a scaffold of story. It weaves a tapestry from the threads of fear, wonder, and the innate need to find a face in the storm. Mythology, then, was not a primitive prelude to science, but a parallel and profound tool for world-making, a way to explain the world when science had not yet arrived. Our brains are, at their core, relentless, pattern-seeking machines. This is a deep-seated biological inheritance, a survival mechanism honed over millennia. To miss the pattern in the rustling grass, the potential predator, was a fatal error. But to see a pattern where none existed, a mere wind, was a harmless mistake. Evolution, therefore, favored a bias toward agency, a tendency to attribute intention and cause to the events around us. This is the bedrock of our cognition, a propensity for what some call patternicity and agency detection. When the sky darkens and a low rumble echoes in the distance, the ancient circuitry in our limbic system does not calmly process barometric pressure. It flinches. It asks, instinctively, "Who is there?" It is a question born not of curiosity alone, but of survival. The mind recoils from pure chaos. It would rather populate the world with conscious, willful entities than accept the terrifying silence of random, indifferent forces. Is our hunger for narrative, then, written into the very fabric of our neurons, a default setting for a mind that must find meaning to feel safe? This neurological imperative found its voice in the first communal acts of explanation. In the flickering firelight of caves, our ancestors began the work of managing chaos through the language of symbol. Archaeologists find not just depictions of the animals they hunted, but also powerful, abstract renderings of the forces that hunted them. A zigzag line carved into stone is not merely a decoration, it is a theory of lightning. A handprint stenciled beside it is a signature of presence, an attempt to say, "I was here, and I witnessed this power." The volcano that buried their world in ash was not a geological event. It was the breath of a mountain god. The flood that reshaped the valley was not a hydrologic cycle. It was the tears of a grieving sky. These were the first hypotheses, framed not in equations but in epic poems and cave paintings. They were efforts to domesticate the terrifying sublime, to give the uncontrollable a name, a personality, and sometimes through ritual and offering, a potential for negotiation. Could we see these ancient artists not as superstitious primitives, but as the first philosophers, using the only tools they had, image and story, to build a world that made sense? And this impulse did not vanish with the advent of the microscope or the telescope. It merely migrated, finding new expressions in a world seemingly explained by science. When a loved one is taken by a sudden accident, the cold statistical explanation of cause and effect offers little solace. The facts are a barren landscape. So, the human spirit, refusing to be comforted by probability, constructs a story. It was fate. It was meant to be. They are in a better place. We search for signs, for meanings in the mundane, a song on the radio, a bird at the window. We create rituals, from grand funerals to the simple private act of visiting a graveside. These are not rejections of science, but affirmations of a deeper, more ancient need. They are modern myths, personal narratives we build to bridge the chasm between the logical explanation of an event and the emotional cataclysm it leaves in its wake. In the face of the inexplicable, do we not still, like our ancestors, seek to manage the chaos with the only language profound enough to hold our grief and our hope? The language of story? A counter-argument naturally arises from this line of thought. If myth is merely a comforting fiction, a placeholder for real knowledge, why has it not simply withered away under the bright, unforgiving light of empirical truth? Why do these ancient stories retain their power, their grip on our imagination, long after their literal explanations have been supplanted? The persistence of myth suggests its function was never solely explanatory. Its purpose was never to compete with science on science's terms. A myth is not a failed theory of meteorology. It is a successful theory of meaning. It answers a different set of questions. Science tells us how the lightning bolt forms. Myth tells us what it means, that it strikes here and not there, now and not later. It embeds the event within a moral or cosmic order. It connects the individual's shock and awe to the community's shared understanding of power, justice, and caprice. The myth of Sisyphus does not explain geology. It explains the human condition. So perhaps the question is not why myth persists, but what profound human need does it continue to serve that data alone cannot satisfy? The answer lies in the nature of the comfort it provides. When an event shatters our understanding, when it stretches beyond our grasp, we do not merely need an answer. We need an anchor. We need a story that is sufficient to hold the weight of our confusion, sufficient to weave the trauma into the ongoing narrative of our lives. It is the difference between knowing the chemical composition of a tear and understanding the grief that produces it. One is a fact, the other is a truth, and they inhabit different realms. The story does not have to be factually true to be emotionally and psychologically true. It has to provide a container for the uncontainable. This is why, even in our age of high technology, we still build stages. We still gather in the dark, not before screens, but before living actors, to participate in a collective ritual of storytelling. For the screen offers information, but the stage offers presence. It is a fundamental need to be seen, to be felt, to touch one another with raw emotion. The ritual of performance, whether in an ancient amphitheater or a modern playhouse, is a reenactment of that primal scene around the fire. It is a space where we collectively agree to suspend our disbelief, to let a story wash over us and, for a moment, make sense of the senseless. The stage is a dedicated space for the kind of meaning-making that data cannot provide. It is where we go to practice being human, to confront our fears and our desires in a safe container, and to emerge feeling, if not with answers, then with a sense of shared understanding. So, we return to the lightning. We have mapped its electrical path. We can predict its likelihood. We can even photograph its intricate branching form. Yet, when the sky cracks open and the world is illuminated in a sudden, terrifying flash, a part of us still flinches. A part of us still hears, not the collapse of an electrical field, but a voice. And in that moment, which is more real, the silent, factual explanation, or the story that rises, unbidden from the deepest parts of our being, connecting us to every human who ever looked at the storm and wondered, if the ultimate truth of our experience is not just in the facts we know, but in the stories we need to tell about them, then what does it mean to truly understand the world? In an age where the flick of a thumb can summon a universe of entertainment, where entire narratives are compressed into 60-second loops and epic sagas are binge-watched in a single sedentary weekend, a curious anachronism persists. Thousands of people still dress up, travel across cities, and queue in the evening air. They hand over tangible currency for a slip of paper that grants them a single, fixed seat in a darkening room. They are there for a story that cannot be paused. There will be no rewind, no fast forward. The performance will unfold at its own deliberate pace, and if a line is flubbed or a prop fails, the audience will witness it, together, in real time. This is not a rejection of the digital, but a quiet, collective insistence on something older, something fundamentally different. Why do we still build stages when we are already surrounded by screens? The answer may begin not in the grand theaters of today, but in the silent, coded wiring of our own brains. When we watch an actor on a screen, no matter how high the definition, our brain understands it as a representation. It is light projected onto a flat surface, a clever illusion. But when we share the same physical space with a performer, when we hear the intake of their breath, see the subtle tremor in their hand, and feel the vibration of their voice in the air around us, a deeper neurological circuit is activated. This is the domain of mirror neurons, a complex system that blurs the line between observing an action and performing it ourselves. On screen, a character's grief is a signal we decode. In a theater, that grief, conveyed through the live, unedited presence of another human, resonates within us as a potential experience. Our own empathy is not just requested, it is, in a sense, physically triggered. We feel the performance in our muscles, in our viscera, in a way that a two-dimensional image can never fully replicate. The stage, then, is not merely a platform for storytelling, it is a biological catalyst, a technology designed to hack into our innate capacity for shared feeling. Is the allure of the live event, then, a simple, hardwired hunger for a more potent emotional signal? This craving for shared, embodied experience echoes back through millennia, long before the concepts of theater or neuroscience existed. Consider the ancient stone circles scattered across the landscapes of northern Europe, the most famous being Stonehenge. Archaeologists debate their precise purpose, calendar, temple, burial ground, but their form is unmistakably theatrical. They are not buildings with roofs and walls. They are arrangements of massive stones creating a designated space, a stage for something to happen. The participants would gather within or around this circle, their attention focused on a central point, perhaps where the sun would strike a particular stone on the solstice. This was a live performance of the cosmos itself, a drama of light and shadow played out for a captive audience. Similarly, deep pits found in Neolithic settlements, often called ritual wells or shafts, suggest a different kind of staging. Descending into the earth, away from the mundane world above, to perform a sacred act, this was a deliberate creation of a separate reality, a sacred theater in the round. These were not passive observances, they were communal events where the community collectively witnessed and participated in the narratives that gave their world meaning. The stones were the first proscenium arch, the well shaft the first black box theater. Did we invent the stage not for entertainment, but as a fundamental tool for making sense of our place in the universe? In our modern, hyper-connected world, this ancient need has not vanished. It has perhaps become more urgent. We are drowning in connection of a certain kind, a torrent of text, emojis, and curated images flowing through the cold glass of our screens. Yet this digital communion often leaves us with a peculiar sense of isolation, a feeling of being simultaneously informed and untouched. The live event, be it a rock concert, a stage play, a religious service, or a public festival, becomes the antidote. It is where we go to touch each other with real emotion, as the outline suggests. In the shared silence of a theater, the collective gasp at a plot twist, or the synchronized roar of a crowd at a stadium, we are reminded of our physical belonging to a tribe. The flickering light of 1,000 cell phones at a concert is a modern-day echo of holding up a lighter. It is a silent, collective agreement to be present, together, in a wave of shared feeling that no algorithm can generate. This is the ritual of co-presence, a temporary sanctuary from the fragmented, asynchronous nature of digital life. In a world mediated by text and screen, is the stage the last truly public square for the unfiltered, unedited exchange of raw human energy? A skeptic might argue, and rightly so, that this is merely nostalgia, a romantic attachment to an outdated form. Is the theater just a quaint relic, a kind of cultural Luddism resisting the inevitable tide of technological progress? After all, screens offer unparalleled access, convenience, and spectacle. They can transport us to impossible worlds with a fidelity that the most elaborate stagecraft could never match. Perhaps the persistence of the stage is simply a luxury, an aesthetic choice for those who can afford the time and ticket price, a form of sentimentalism rather than a necessity. This counter-argument holds weight. The digital realm is not the enemy of human connection. It is its own powerful, evolving ecosystem. Yet, even within this ecosystem, we see a push towards liveness, live streams, real-time interactions, the fleeting nature of stories that disappear after 24 hours. It seems we are constantly trying to inject the urgency and authenticity of the live event back into the digital sphere, with mixed results. Could it be that our screens are not replacements for the stage, but rather desperate imitations of its most powerful effect? The conclusion, then, is not that we need the stage. It is that we cannot not have it. It is not an optional extra in the project of human society, but a foundational component. For a society to function, it is not enough to have laws and transactions, the cold, hard logic of a social contract. We also need ritual. The stage, in its broadest sense, is the engine of ritual. It is the space where the abstract values of a culture, love, justice, sacrifice, community, are not just discussed, but are performed, embodied, and felt. The law tells us what we must not do. The ritual shows us who we aspire to be. The shared experience on the sacred ground of a stage, whether that ground is made of ancient stone or polished wood, reaffirms the invisible bonds that hold us together. It is a live broadcast of our collective soul, transmitted not through fiber optic cables, but through the vulnerable, breathing, and irreplaceable presence of human beings sharing a moment in time and space. We build stages for the same reason our ancestors arranged monoliths, to create a focal point where the chaotic noise of individual lives can briefly coalesce into a single, meaningful chord. But if the stage is the vessel, then what is the essential substance it carries? What is the invisible architecture that turns a gathering of strangers into a temporary community? This suggests that ritual itself is not a primitive custom, but a sophisticated and necessary operating system. It is the software that runs on the hardware of society, a recurring program that maintains, updates, and reinforces what a community holds sacred. A community cannot simply will itself into existence and cohesion. It requires these repeated, formalized actions, these performances, to remind itself of its own identity. The handshake, the wedding vow, the national anthem before a sporting event, the standing ovation at the end of a play, these are all mini rituals, small stages upon which we perform our belonging. They are the code that allows the complex and often fragile system of human collaboration to function. Without these shared scripts, are we left with just a collection of individuals staring at our own separate screens, waiting for a signal that never truly comes? A new community forms, a fragile constellation of individuals drawn together by necessity or chance. In the raw dawn of a collective, no one knows the rules. Who decides? Who speaks first? Who is trusted when the shadows lengthen and a predator's cry echoes from the forest? There are no resumes, no titles, no inherited thrones. Only a silent, anxious tension, the unspoken question hanging in the air like morning mist. And then, something happens. A fire is lit in a specific way. A particular chant is begun by an elder. An animal is slain, and its meat is distributed not by hunger, but by a newly invented protocol. A ritual is performed. And in that shared, patterned action, the mist clears. The software begins to install itself onto the raw hardware of the group. The human brain, that 3-pound universe of firing neurons, is not a solitary processor. It is a node in a network, and it operates most efficiently within a clearly defined social topology. Constant negotiation over status and role is neurologically expensive, a drain on precious cognitive resources better spent on spotting threats or finding food. Ritual provides an elegant, pre-conscious solution. It creates a shared reference point for who is who, without the need for lengthy explanation or violent conflict. It is a silent language that the limbic system understands perfectly. When a young member of the tribe undergoes a painful initiation rite and emerges with a new scar or a new name, the entire group's perception of that individual is instantly recalibrated. The ritual hasn't just changed the boy, it has reprogrammed every other brain in the community. The ambiguity is gone, replaced by a clear, emotionally charged file. This is a man, a warrior, one of us. Could it be that our very neurology craves the clarity that ceremony provides, seeking the relief of a defined role over the exhausting freedom of chaos? This neurological imperative leaves its mark on time itself, etched into the bones of the earth. The archaeological record is not merely a catalog of tools and potsherds, it is a library of forgotten software. From the deepest caves of Europe, where handprints were stenciled in ochre alongside magnificent beasts, to the monumental stone circles that track the cosmos, we find the same story. Early societies, without exception, developed intricate ritual systems to establish roles, hierarchies, and identities. The coming-of-age ceremony, the sacrificial offering to unseen forces, the ritualistic declaration of a new leader, these were not cultural flourishes. They were the fundamental operating code. A burial site where a body is laid to rest with specific grave goods, a flint knife for a man, shell beads for a woman, is not just a grave. It is a powerful, silent statement of a social structure, a way of shouting into the future. This is how we were organized. This is what we valued. The artifacts are the hardware, but the ritual of their placement is the software that gave them meaning. What does it say about us that our most enduring monuments are often not places where we lived, but places where we performed? This ancient code did not vanish with the advent of the modern world. It merely found new containers. The secular city, for all its glass and steel, runs on the same ritualistic fuel. A university convocation, with its procession of robes and hoods in a precise hierarchy of colors, is a direct descendant of the tribal initiation. The solemn oath of office, the hand on a sacred text, transforms a citizen into a president, a judge, a soldier. A wedding ceremony, beyond its legal function, is a public formatting of a relationship, instructing the wider community on how to perceive and interact with this new union. Even a national day of mourning with its shared silence and draped flags is a collective ritual that allows a million-strong society to understand itself as a structure in a moment of profound dislocation. These ceremonies are the invisible architecture of our togetherness, the scripts we follow to remind ourselves that we are not just a crowd, but a culture. In abandoning old rituals, do we simply create new, more subtle ones to take their place? But this reliance on form raises a troubling mirror. If ritual is merely a format, a piece of social software, can it not become hollow, empty? Can the shell persist long after the living creature inside has died? We have all witnessed it, the wedding where the vows are recited by rote, the corporate mission statement read aloud with dead eyes, the political ceremony that feels like a pantomime of a forgotten faith. This is the danger of the code becoming corrupted, of the ritual devolving into pure, meaningless spectacle. It becomes a cage rather than a cradle, enforcing a structure that no longer serves the hearts it is meant to bind. When the ritual is severed from genuine belief or emotion, does it not become a tool for manipulation, a way to demand conformity without earning loyalty? Is the most insidious oppression not the one enforced by brute force, but the one maintained by the hollow repetition of a once sacred form? Perhaps. Yet, even in its potential emptiness, there is a profound truth. The form, the ritual itself, may be the only vessel we have to carry us back to meaning. It is the visible path we walk when the internal map is lost. We act as if we believe, and in the acting, the belief sometimes stirs from its slumber. The ritual is the format we use to reprogram our emotions, our sense of order, and our reason for being within a collective. It is the deliberate, structured action that can, paradoxically, create the space for unstructured, genuine feeling to emerge. The handshake may be a formality, but it is a formality that can seal a bond. The funeral rite may be a script, but it is a script that gives grief a shape and a direction, preventing it from collapsing into formless despair. And sometimes it is in the most rigid, formalized of actions that we express our deepest vulnerability. The beauty of a single, perfectly arranged flower placed on a soldier's grave amidst the chaos of war. The careful, ritualized tea ceremony conducted in a city under siege. These are not acts of denial, but acts of defiance. They are the social software running a program of tenderness on a hardware of brutality. The ritual in these moments becomes the strongest possible way to express fragility itself. It is a whisper that echoes louder than any bomb blast, a testament to the human spirit's stubborn insistence on order, on meaning, on beauty, even when surrounded by their opposites. Could it be that our most profound strength lies not in abandoning form, but in mastering it so completely that we can use it to speak the language of our own softness? This very softness, this seemingly irrational pursuit of beauty, presents its own ancient paradox. In a world of survival, where every calorie and every moment counts, why would we ever bother with what is merely beautiful? In the brutal calculus of the hunt, where a single misstep could mean starvation, spending an hour grinding ochre to paint a stripe on your cheek seems like a catastrophic liability. It is time not spent tracking prey. It is attention diverted from watching for predators. The scent of the pigment could alert the very animals you seek, or attract the ones that seek you. To an outside observer, it is the height of impracticality, a dangerous frivolity. And yet, this is precisely what our ancestors did. The act of adornment, of creating beauty, was a signal that burned through the pragmatic noise. It was a silent, flamboyant boast. I am so skilled, so resourceful, so master of my domain, that I have calories and time to spare. I can afford to be useless. This beautiful, dangerous extravagance was a testament to surplus strength, a billboard advertising genetic fitness more effectively than any mere display of physical power. In a life ruled by necessity, isn't the most radical power the freedom to be unnecessary? In the deep, breathing silence of a prehistoric dawn, a figure moves through the mist-shrouded forest. Their face is a canvas of ochre and charcoal, a stark map of lines and spirals. Around their neck hangs a necklace of bear teeth and polished bone, each piece a hard-won trophy. This adornment does not make them faster or stronger. It does not sharpen their spear or guide their aim. In fact, it does the opposite. The clatter of bones betrays their position. The vivid paint makes them a clear target against the green and brown tapestry of the wilderness. It is a declaration, a flag planted in the vulnerable soil of their own body. It says, I am here. I have survived enough. I am skilled enough to carry this danger. This is the ancient, paradoxical whisper from our past, that beauty was once, and perhaps still is, a kind of peril. Consider the immense cost. In a world where every calorie was counted, where survival was a minute-by-minute calculation of energy expended versus energy gained, why would any sensible creature spend hours grinding minerals for paint, days carving a piece of ivory, or risk a dangerous encounter to procure a specific feather? The evolutionary biologist Amatz Zahavi offered a compelling answer with his handicap principle. He proposed that the most reliable signals in nature are those that are costly, even wasteful. A peacock's magnificent tail is a burden. It requires immense energy to grow and makes flight cumbersome, attracting predators. But that is precisely the point. By flourishing despite this extravagant handicap, the peacock broadcasts an undeniable message about the superior quality of its genes. I am so fit, so robust that I can afford this extravagance and still thrive. The early human adorning themselves was engaging in the same biological rhetoric. The red ochre was not merely pigment, it was a testament to a surplus of time and skill. The leopard teeth were not just decoration, they were a receipt for a successful high-stakes hunt. This early beauty was a language of viability, spoken in the dialect of deliberate disadvantage. It was a way of saying, "Look what I can afford to waste." But what archaeological echoes remain of this costly conversation? The soil holds the evidence. In graves tens of thousands of years old, we find our ancestors not as anonymous skeletons, but as individuals curated by their own culture. A body buried at Sungir, in Russia, is accompanied by thousands of meticulously carved ivory beads, a garment that would have required years of labor to create. In Africa, abalone shells filled with a primitive paint kit suggest an artist's studio from 100 millennia past. We find skeletons with teeth intentionally filed into patterns, or skulls that show signs of early ritualistic trepanning. These are not the practical tools of subsistence. They are the artifacts of identity. This curation of the body was likely the first social ledger, a way of inscribing status, lineage, and role directly onto the flesh. To be beautiful was to be someone of consequence. It was a public record of a private story, a way of weaving the individual into the collective memory of the tribe long before the written word. The beauty was the barcode, scannable by all, that held a life's data. But if this impulse was born in the crucible of survival, how has it transformed in the relative safety of the modern world? Today, the forest has been replaced by the cityscape, but the fundamental grammar of adornment remains eerily similar. We have traded bear teeth for diamonds, ochre for designer cosmetics, and ritual scarification for elective surgery. The stakes, while different, can be just as high. The pursuit of beauty in the 21st century is a multi-trillion-dollar industry built on the same ancient foundations of signaling. A person who can afford a tailor-made suit, a delicate gold watch, or the time for daily gym sessions is signaling a modern form of surplus, not of hunting prowess, but of economic and temporal capital. Even the risks persist. High-heeled shoes alter posture and invite injury, a literal handicap in the name of elegance. Cosmetic surgery carries the genuine threat of complications, even death, a gamble taken for the sake of social and professional advantage. The tattoos that cover a banker's arm, or the intricate braids of a student, are all modern versions of that prehistoric bio-resume, declaring allegiances, milestones, and personal narratives. The urge to be seen, to be differentiated, to communicate our place in the hierarchy through our very skin, is a thread that runs unbroken from the campfire to the catwalk. But this leads us to the central, stubborn paradox. If beauty is so dangerous, so costly, and so often a vector for anxiety and exclusion, why does the impulse remain so fiercely, universally human? The answer may lie not in the destination of being beautiful, but in the profound, existential act of creating beauty. The risk is not a bug in the system, it is the core feature. The cost is the entire point. To invest oneself in something fragile, impermanent, and non-utilitarian is a defiant act of meaning-making in a world that often reduces life to mere function. It is a declaration that we are more than just survival machines. The danger inherent in beauty, whether the physical risk of a procedure or the social risk of nonconformity, is what makes the signal authentic. It proves our commitment. It is the price we pay to transform our bodies from simple biological entities into stories, into statements, into art. It is the gamble we take to ensure we are not just another face in the crowd, but a presence that is witnessed, remembered, and etched into the memory of others. The proof is written in the very pigments we once ground between stones, a ghostly residue on the fingertips of time. And if each tattoo, each piercing, each carefully chosen garment is a chapter in this nonverbal biography, what story does the unadorned skin truly tell? On the weathered skin of an ancient warrior, a double spiral, etched in soot and ash. On the delicate wrist of a young woman in a bustling city, a simple red circle, crisp and modern. No one wrote a single word, yet in their respective villages, one of earth and stone, the other of steel and glass, their communities understood. The spiral spoke of battles survived, of a spirit intertwined with the cosmos. The circle whispered of a promise kept, a cycle completed, a private vow made public. These are not mere decorations. They are silent curricula vitae, written not on paper but on the living canvas of the self, each mark a chapter in an ongoing unspoken autobiography. The human brain, that 3-pound universe within our skulls, possesses a remarkable secret. Long before it learned to decode the abstract squiggles of language, it was a master interpreter of images. Visual information travels a neural superhighway, bypassing the slower, more analytical circuits required for reading. An image, a snarling predator, a ripe fruit, a welcoming smile, carries an immediate, visceral weight. It triggers emotion, memory, and instinct in a single, lightning-fast burst. A word must be unpacked. A symbol is simply understood. This is the primal power that tattooing taps into. It speaks the mother tongue of our neurology, a language of feeling before fact. When we mark our skin, we are not writing a sentence to be read and analyzed. We are planting a flag of meaning directly into the soil of perception. The tattoo is less a statement and more an experience, captured in permanent ink. Is our deepest understanding not, then, a form of sight, rather than a product of speech? This neurological preference for the symbolic left its earliest records not in books, but on bodies themselves. Consider Ötzi the Iceman, emerging from his glacial tomb after 5 millennia. His skin, preserved by ice and time, is a map of a life lived in a harsh world. The dark lines cross-hatching his joints are not random. They are a therapeutic language, an ancient form of acupuncture meant to ward off pain and infirmity. They speak of a body in dialogue with the elements, of knowledge passed down through generations on how to manipulate the flesh for survival. Far away, in the highlands of Papua New Guinea, the men of the Dani people wear intricate facial tattoos that tell a different yet equally profound story. Each pattern is a public record of social standing, of tribal affiliations, of courage demonstrated in battle. In these cultures, the skin is a living passport, a walking resume that announces one's place in the world without a single uttered word. The body becomes its own archive, its history visible for all to see. But what happens to a man's identity when the community that can read his skin disappears? Does the record become a mere scar, its meaning lost to the silence of forgotten languages? In our modern, seemingly disconnected world, this ancient practice has not vanished. It has transformed. The contemporary individual who chooses a tattoo is often engaged in the same fundamental act as Ötzi or the Dani warrior, the act of self-definition. A name inked over the heart is not just a name. It is an anchor to a loved one, a bulwark against the erosion of memory. A personal symbol, a geometric animal, a celestial body, a fragment of poetry, becomes a talisman, a visual shorthand for a complex inner world. Collective symbols, like the insignia of a military unit or the logo of a band, are declarations of belonging. They silently proclaim, "I have endured this, I am part of this, and paradoxically, this is what makes me different." In an age of digital profiles and fleeting online identities, the tattoo offers a permanence that feels profoundly authentic. It is a truth etched in flesh, a commitment that cannot be easily deleted or edited. Yet, if this is a personal declaration, who is the intended audience? Is it for the world, or is it, first and foremost, a reminder for the self, a landmark on the internal map of one's own life? This very question leads us to a potent counter-argument. What of the tattoo that is hidden from view? The intricate design on the small of a back, the secret phrase along the rib cage, the symbol known only to the wearer and perhaps one other soul. If a resume is meant to be read by potential employers, what value does a hidden tattoo hold in this economy of identity? Does a story untold still function as a story? This seeming contradiction reveals a deeper truth about the nature of these marks. Their power is not solely, or even primarily, dependent on public legibility. The value lies in the act of inscription itself, the pain of the needle, the permanence of the choice, the transformation of the body's blank page into a text of personal significance. This process is a ritual of self-creation. The tattoo becomes a covenant with oneself, a physical manifestation of an internal reality. It is a way of saying, "This is true for me," regardless of who sees it. The community that reads it may be a community of one, but that does not diminish its validity. It simply shifts the purpose from public declaration to private confirmation. After all, is the most important record we keep the one for the world, or the one we leave for ourselves to remember who we are? So, we see that the silent resume of the tattoo is not a simple document. It is a layered text written in the ancient language of symbol, translated through the lens of personal and cultural context. It can be a public proclamation and a private prayer, a historical record and a future aspiration. It bridges our primal neurology with our complex social needs, allowing us to carry our stories with us in the most intimate way possible. It is art, not always meant for exhibition, but for remembrance, a way to hold on to a piece of our humanity, to declare a truth that transcends words, even in the midst of chaos. And if we can mark our skin with such intention as a way of preserving a narrative against the tides of time and forgetting, then what other profound, seemingly paradoxical acts might we undertake to safeguard our souls? Why, for instance, would a soldier in the midst of war feel compelled to write a poem?